Chapter 141, Chapter 110 The End. The earthy yellow light continued to fluctuate below, as the divine king's figure became increasingly ethereal. At this moment, looking at the goddess before him seeking forgiveness, Cronus had a somewhat strange expression. It could be called an act of betrayal from some year, and one did not know what the other party would think after today. Metis, huh? Perhaps. Wisdom, indeed, has extraordinary power. Whether Metis had done this deed or not, he was all too clear. Shaking his head slightly, standing before the gods, Cronus wore a smile. However, combined with the surrounding environment and the events that had just occurred, it felt somewhat out of place. A sideways glance at the goddess destined to regret once more, the divine king paid her no attention, instead turning to Zeus standing behind her. He would not waste his last moments on her. Standing among the gods, facing the gaze of his father, the golden-haired deity did not dodge but met the gaze head-on. By contrast, many other deities were already panicking. Not bad. Nodding slightly, Cronus seemed to give his approval. At least you haven't been scared witless. After a moment of silence, Zeus's gaze swept over his two brothers. Disappointingly, they were faring not too badly, perhaps because Cronus hadn't looked at them yet. Everything has a cause, Father God. You possess such great power, yet you fought with us for 10 years, that surely wasn't just for a laugh. As though he had forgotten how he arrogantly said I call you this for the last time just half a day ago, Zeus still dared not address Cronus by his name. But his emotions also settled down. There were only two outcomes now: if his father's power remained, then begging for mercy would be futile, better to retain dignity and accept his fate. And if things were as he suspected, then he wouldn't provoke the other party at the final moment. Zeus was always a pragmatist. Aside from later growing complacent and somewhat unable to restrain his small hobbies, whether it was the ugly titans, the ferocious-looking offspring, or anything else useful, he could tolerate it, and today was no different. Shaking his head slightly, to the surprise of the deities present, Cronus did not enumerate the crimes of rebellion as he had with Zeus before, but instead posed a question to him. Zeus, my child, the so-called destined one to overthrow me, tell me, what have you learned from today's experience? Once more silent for a moment, the divine king's talk of a destined new king was a great irony, but Zeus replied calmly. I have learned the importance of power, father. As long as one has enough power, nothing else matters. Wisdom or influence, they are merely means to acquire power. This wasn't just sycophancy to show his weakness to the divine king, but also Zeus's honest thought at that moment. He had the support of half of the world's deities and help from the goddess of wisdom, yet he still suffered a crushing defeat. But he was somewhat puzzled. The power of the gods came naturally, and the strength of the divine king's authority could be roughly estimated. Even if, as he suspected, the other party was making an attempt to ascend to a higher plane, what was he relying on? Perhaps there was some special secret contained within. And the reason likely lied in what Cronus had been doing all these years. It could be related to lawmaking, or to the stars, or perhaps, to creating life. If he got past this hurdle, he would certainly delve into these secrets. Is this your answer, then? It's rather extreme, but not incorrect. Not knowing what the other was thinking, the divine king nodded, neither confirming nor denying. What about you? Then, Hades. What do you think? Once again addressing his original eldest son, Cronus asked indifferently. Now, some of the keener-minded deities among those present were beginning to perceive something. I think it's better to strengthen oneself rather than covet what others have. Faced with the father god's inquiry, Hades, who hadn't shown much in the previous battle, paused for a moment before responding. If Cronus's strength did not come from an external divine authority, then it must be that his own time-space power had undergone a change, which was also evident in the previous battle. Such a degree of divine authority was not something that a powerful divine power associated with time-space godhood could achieve. Perhaps some methods indeed could alter godhood, and if given the chance, he too would learn to bring change to the desolate underworld. His sister, Demeter, was his best choice. Unfortunately, influenced by her godhood, she innately loathed the barren underworld. That fits your personality, Hades. You are practical and willing to accept reality. Once again passing judgment, Cronus finally turned to his second son. Among the gods present, he was one of the few who not only had not suffered but had gained benefits. Earthquakes, tsunamis, storms, the phenomena that were increasingly intensifying around the world and perfectly aligned with the godhood of Poseidon showed no sign of stopping. Go ahead, speak. Though I haven't expected much from you, you still deserve an opportunity. His face flushed, even overshadowing his prior tension and panic. Poseidon hadn't expected his father god to think so little of him. But amidst the somewhat strange gazes of the other deities, he nonetheless responded loudly. Divine authority is supreme, that's what I've learned. Unlike his two brothers, Poseidon believed that though many reasons could be found for Cronus's might and many explanations for the power of the former divine king, these were but post hoc justifications for the outcome. But he felt that perhaps there were not so many secrets, the divine king was meant to be this strong. If he were divine king, he could do the same. However, in response to his answer, the divine king simply said, ambitious, but incompetent. No different from what I thought. Suddenly, Poseidon felt the other deities' gazes upon him grow even stranger. It was a peculiar psychology. Even if the divine king was their enemy, when he demonstrated such immense power, the gods paid close attention to any of his evaluations. Moreover, this was the divine king making a judgment about his own male offspring. After asking around, it was unclear if anyone had received the answers they sought. In any case, the last of the divine king's power had begun to gather in Cronus's translucent body. The sky of the present world continued to descend, creating an even more oppressive atmosphere among the gods. They did not know what the divine king intended to do, but that did not stop them from feeling nervous. Then, right before them, Cronus extended a hand and gently pointed. A familiar yet unfamiliar force began to coalesce in front of him. Its breath reached out and wrapped around the three deities before him. Some had more, some had less, but all three deities received a portion. What? What are you doing? Across from Cronus, with a somewhat hoarse voice, an incredulous thought rose in Zeus's mind. Or rather, he had some guesses, but when it actually happened, he still found it unbelievable. Didn't you guess it? With a slight smile, a pressure surged forward. The three gods knelt on the ground, but at this moment, they had no thoughts of resistance. Cronus tossed an intangible thing before them, divine authority. Having no physical form, it only became visibly distinct under the constraint of Cronus's power. As it left its original master, it instantly dispersed into the intangible, but under the constraint of the former master, it formed a mysterious connection with the three deities before him. Some had more, some had less, but everyone received a part. The world as we see it is different indeed. What you care about, I actually do not regard as important. Only I have ever defeated myself. A divine king will never lose to another. But Zeus, I hope you remember. The smile unchanged, bereft of the divine authority that was already minuscule, the power of kingship bestowed by the present world was now without support. But this last bit of power wouldn't have lasted much longer anyway. Yet, in this moment, to Zeus, his father's smile seemed to carry a profound meaning. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. Divine authority is not eternal. Wisdom and strength are not distinctly separate. When heaven and earth part, thought will replace ignorance, just as it is now mine, the era that belongs to you will also come to an end. And at that time, I will stand above the high heavens, waiting for the conclusion that belongs to you. Authority departed from its master, the last symbol of the second epoch was transferred. Something seemed to have changed in the world, but because the new divine king had not yet ascended, that change was temporarily halted. Before the eyes of all gods, Cronus's divine form had already become nearly invisible, his voice fading. Going from clear to indistinct, accompanied by a barely discernible chuckle, with a turn, the unparalleled divine king had seemingly merged with the environment around him. Father God. After a short while, with no further changes occurring, Zeus tentatively inquired, but no existence responded to him. The space before him was empty, and even with his perception heightened to the utmost, he could not detect the slightest trace of the other, as if no deity had ever existed there. Zeus did not find this strange. The king of time and space would rightfully have such an ability. So, just like this, have we won? Feeling somewhat relaxed, yet somewhat unable to accept it, everything that had transpired seemed like a joke, like a dream. Endless dark clouds slowly spread from the east, the rumblings of the earth yet to cease. For a time, Zeus felt a sense of bewilderment. He did not understand the meaning of his father's last words. A curse, cursing that he would also be overthrown by his own child. But that didn't seem quite right. It appeared that he was truly just evaluating his own millennia of experience, providing some warning to those who would follow. Zeus, I. Aside, the former water goddess supported her unconscious husband. The divine king had vanished, and she, who had been consciously lowering her presence, was about to say something, but the next moment, a streak of yellow light flashed by. That was Gaia. With the departure of her master, the stalemated force against Mother Earth also swiftly dissipated. Almost instantly, she arrived at the scene. Casting a look at the place where Cronus had disappeared, her somewhat aged face bore down on the gods, her voice demanding sharply, "Where is he? Where has he gone?" However, no one among the present deities could give her an answer. Chapter 142, Chapter 111 The Fourth Layer. I do not know, respected Mother Earth. I think no one dares to spy on the Father God's whereabouts. Perhaps he left on his own, perhaps he has returned to the embrace of the world. Although it was somewhat hard to accept at the moment, and wondering how the situation had changed so drastically in such a short time, Zeus's heart couldn't help but flare with excitement, feeling the faint connection to the title of Divine King. Unlike the previous epic, even though the title of Divine King had now almost faded to nothing due to lavish squandering, it was indeed handed down by the previous Divine King himself, not directly usurped. By comparison, Cronus had taken 500 years to become the true Divine King, but Zeus would immediately become the new king as soon as he acquired it. As for how to restore its power, that was a matter for another time. His father had set a good example for him, making it clear what kind of deeds would please the world. It was just unfortunate that others, not just himself, but Hades and Poseidon as well, had also formed a connection with the divine authority. Zeus gave a relieved glance at the god of the ocean, who, supported by the primordial water goddess, had already fallen unconscious. The two brothers were an easy matter, as their contributions paled in comparison to his own. Perhaps some bargaining would make them abandon their vain hopes. But if his dear father-in-law were unharmed now, no one knew if he would follow so-called fate and support his rise to the throne. After all, among the original 6 male titans, the god of the ocean and the god of the sun had both revealed covetous glances at the title of Divine King to varying degrees. And with his numerous followers, it went without saying who Mother Earth would choose between her son and herself. Left yes. Gaia, to the side, paid no attention to the latter part of Zeus's statement, dismissing the idea of impacting greatness, returning to the world as mere fiction. Turning her gaze to the distance, Gaia saw that the colliding spirit realm and the realm of lightness had suddenly calmed and begun to fade away silently. After all, once one party left, there was no longer any need for the other to continue. Indeed, it was those two. Both you and I are the same. Even in the end, we cannot see clearly what truly happened. With a cold snort and a cryptic remark, Gaia did not care for the will of the other deities present, and turned to leave. Her initial intention had been to entangle the Divine King, waiting until his disguise was exhausted, to then see his true face. But clearly, Gaia had overestimated her strength. She couldn't entangle him at all. Therefore, she needed to visit the underworld to seek answers from her brother. Even though he most likely would not tell her the truth, Gaia still needed to seek an explanation from him. At least, she had to figure out where Cronus had gone. Sigh. It's over, Zeus. A flash of golden light, and Mother Earth's figure also disappeared without a trace. Glancing furtively, Hades, who had been standing still from the beginning, looked at Erebus. It had to be said, this goddess had made the most ridiculous choice twice in a row. The sea gods of the Pontus lineage were never a match for those of the ocean god lineage, and now, there was even less need to mention it. Indeed, it's over. Zeus straightened his expression, forcing a smile onto his handsome, golden-haired face. Despite the hidden worries, he did not show them. My fellows, let's return to Olympus for now, to celebrate our victory, if it can be called a victory. I think everyone needs to relax a bit, and then we can together address the disasters of this world. There were still 2 enemies left unresolved, the Titan god Atlas, entangled with the Hecatonkers on the western part of the continent, and Creus, the god of meteorology. Even the sky was still falling, showing no sign of stopping, but these were not the present focus. The ownership of the Divine King title was the key issue at hand. Thus, with their own thoughts, the deities all headed together towards the high mountains in the east. The spirit realm, 4th layer. Turning from void to reality, standing in the 4th layer of the spirit realm, the divine body of Laine began to slowly heal its fine cracks. Though it was only for a brief moment, having borne the power of the interface with such shallow divine power, Laine sustained no small injury. Of course, given his timely withdrawal, such damage was not difficult to recover from. There was no significant change from before. 3 cocoons of light hung suspended in mid-air, facing the crystals formed by the death origin force, with no other traces present. Standing here, Laine sensed the order of the present world. The old king had completely lost his place, and the new king, under his influence, pointed towards three gods, his position yet unsettled. This meant that the present time belonged neither to the second era nor to the third era. Erebus. Truly decisive. Shaking his head lightly, although the primary objectives were achieved, the actions of the Dark Overlord still had an effect on Laine. One of the most crucial points was that the punishment from the will of the world would be somewhat weaker than anticipated. Unlike other deities, Laine's control over his authority was very precise. If he wanted, there was actually no need to cause such a disturbance, resulting in abnormal meteorology and the rerouting of mountains and rivers. But he still did it, colliding with the gods in the most primitive way, all to fulfill the narrative, the divine king and the gods clashing, leading to the destruction of the present world. The price the divine king paid was that the authority that could have lasted 7 days was exhausted in a short period of time. What the gods would face, they would learn once the new king ascended. This was also the choice Laine made when he realized that after stepping into powerful divine force, he could possess half of the great power. On one hand, he was testing how the rules of the present world reacted to such extraordinary powers. But as it turned out, its tolerance was zero. From now on, every time Laine's true body entered the present world, it would become a confrontation between the laws of the spirit realm and the present world, and this confrontation would grow stronger with each occurrence. It instinctively rejected powerful beings. The more powerful the entity, the more evident the rejection. Towards its own, it would choose a gentler weakening, but for outsiders, it would outright deny their entry. In this situation, Laine thought of a simple solution. Since I am restricted, then you all should be restricted as well. As long as everyone is brought to the same level, it's as if none of us were restricted. Thus, there was the collapse of Mount of the Gods, bathing the East Sea in sunlight. Even if the Dark Overlord had acted later, Laine had other measures ready to deploy. It's fine, even if the constraints are fewer now, everything will come back once the king of all monsters is born. Unlike me, it will not talk rules with you. Looking towards the periphery of the underworld, Laine saw the shimmer of Gaia's figure in the fleeting realm of lightness, which had retracted to its original place. It was not surprising that she did not seek him out first. After all, compared to Laine, her own brother was definitely more trustworthy to her. But without even thinking about it, Laine didn't believe Gaia would have gained anything, even though her actual contact with Erebus wasn't much. She was likely easily persuaded by him, for in both power and wisdom, they were not on the same level at all. And Nyx. How strange, are we on good terms? Confused, Laine had not accounted for the Lady of the Night in this turn of the era's collision. She shouldn't suddenly stand on the opposing side, but neither did she have any reason to aid him. Yet, in the midst of the clash with the domain of the Lord of Darkness, Laine sensitively noticed a familiar black skirt hem. Although she ultimately did not take action, her presence there at that time in itself implied some underlying stance. Forget it, it's normal to be puzzled. The thought processes of chaos deities are not something that just anyone can understand. I'll leave that for later. Like Gaia, like the goddess of discord, and several other deities, they always manage to act in ways that, if not for later generations' memories, ordinary people would have trouble comprehending. Now with one more, Nyx, it doesn't seem so strange anymore. Sigh, it's about time. Laine withdrew his gaze, no longer paying attention to the various external matters. The world at this moment must be very lively. Not only because of the after effects of the battle that had just ended but also because of the competition for the position of the new divine king, though that was no longer his concern. Soon, you will have a new name. Looking towards the still chaotic fourth layer of the realm, Laine spoke softly. The first layer of the spirit realm, phantasmal spirit realm, the second layer of the spirit realm, true spirit realm, also known as the communicating spirit realm, the third layer of the spirit realm, dream spirit realm. From today onwards, the fourth layer of the spirit realm will also have a name that belongs solely to it. Chapter 143, Chapter 112, Samsura. Thump. 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 In the silent and chaotic fourth layer of the spirit realm, there was no other noise, just the sound of 3 heartbeats emanating constantly from within the cocoon of light, never ceasing. They maintained an unborn yet alive state, with their connection to the fourth layer interface growing increasingly tight. Standing there, Laine gazed at the floating black crystal, feeling the power that could end all things. Death, but not pure, was caused by the nature of the chaos world itself. After all, even to this day, no deity had truly died. The death and rebirth of Cronus had never erased his immortal essence, and Laine couldn't do that either. Hence, the power of death that grew as a result halted at the pinnacle of great divine power and, unsurprisingly, it had no further potential for growth. So even though there were some underlying concerns, Laine had no other choice. I wonder if it can fulfill my expectation. Well, when I pioneered the spirit realm, I wasn't entirely sure either. Let's just give it a try. Whether it succeeds is up to luck. Taking a deep breath, Laine finally made up his mind. Whether it would succeed or not, it was necessary to try. The matter with the souls of silver humanity was once again a wake-up call for him. Souls, though originating from him, didn't mean they couldn't be tampered with by others on their return. Thus, he needed something to help him solve these problems more effectively. He extended his right hand and gestured lightly. The next moment, the ancient and mysterious well atop Mount Sinai in the central axis of the spirit realm disappeared quietly. Without sound, the half of the divine artifact, the well of origin, which could endow all things with souls, the counterpart of the life vase, appeared before Laine, also in the center of the fourth layer of the spirit realm. From inside the well, threads and strands of power scattered about, drifting into the surrounding environment. Feeling the breath of spiritual life, the three cocoons of light trembled slightly around Laine. The well of origin had become even more powerful, or rather, if it hadn't been split in two, accompanying the world's creatures as they began to multiply, the life vase would have become another Genesis artifact of chaos. In this situation, even though only half remained, its waters were still sufficient to have an extraordinary effect on the deities. Don't be impatient, you will be born into this world soon. Smiling lightly and transmitting a calming thought, the three cocoons of light promptly returned to calmness. Laine looked at the well that was like stone but not stone, like jade but not jade, hesitated for a moment, but still pointed at it in the end. So the next moment, the floating black crystal shattered in response, turning into a cloud of black mist. Released from the form of divinity, the essence of death became more active. The black mist jumped and whirled but eventually drifted down under Laine's control, merging with the waters of the divine artifact below. Under Laine's watchful eye, life and death converged in that moment. Initially, they mixed together, but once they lost control of the power of the spirit realm, they separated instantly. There was no sign of blending between the two, they were clearly distinct, even antagonistic, eroding each other. Instinctively, both knew that if they could vanish the other, they would become stronger. But Laine knew this was just an illusion. Just as I thought. The changes before him did not surprise Laine. In other worlds, he didn't know if life and death could naturally coexist, but in chaos, they definitely could not. As for their desire to eliminate each other, that too was to be expected as the instincts of source power were more primitive than the will of the world. They found it difficult to judge the long-term good or bad of a situation. Indeed, if death were completely erased, the proportion of life in the world would increase, but when one looks at the larger timescale, it's not a good thing. After all, with no death, the world's capacity for life would soon reach its limit. At that point, life would become stagnant water, with no more variation or creation. Fortunately, Laine was prepared for this. With a thought, two streams of breath from different origins slowly came into being in the void, and under his guidance, they moved towards the mouth of the well. The two breaths, one from the past, born from Cronus's death, symbolizing the previous divine king's transformation from life to death, the other from the future, arising because of the three goddesses, symbolizing the change from death to life for the chronology goddesses who otherwise could not have been born due to a change in fate. This was a decision made at the outset. Laine rarely did things without meaning. The reason he still nurtured new deities in the fourth layer of the spirit realm, even though he knew he couldn't grasp the secrets of immortality now, and had expended considerable energy for this, was for the very scene before him. After all, the birth of a deity itself had a special significance. A god whose fate had been intercepted was even more so. Moreover, aside from that, spring, summer, and autumn originally had the incomplete meaning of cycle, which is why Laine thought the chronology goddesses were the best choice. If Timus were unwilling, he could have chosen other gods, but none of them would fit better than them. Then the next moment, as the two mysterious breaths overlapped and rotated, descending together into the well of origin, a miraculous change began to take place. Life and death began to meld together, and a new, more complete symbol was born. It was a cycle, an exchange, a process from birth to destruction, as well as the rebirth that follows destruction. Chapter 144, Chapter 112, Samsura_2. This moment witnessed the complete disintegration of the symbol origin of all things, which should have been the emblem of the intact life base, as its counterpart became part of a new symbol. It was eternal recurrence, and Laine named it Samsura. In the indistinct realm, when the first thread of new power was born, the external source sea also began to boil. Invisible ripples emanated from the spirit realm, and Chaos's instincts seemed to realize that something crucial was about to be born. He reveled in it, and made preparations to welcome it. However, it did not last long, for at a certain moment, the transformation suddenly ceased out of thin air. Oh. This isn't right. Before the well of origin, Laine's expression changed slightly. In front of him, the life and death that had been continually transforming into Samsura encountered a problem again. And this time, it was a problem he feared would be very difficult to resolve. Is the gap still too wide? Indeed, it's no use. Murmuring to himself, Laine realized the problem, which had been his prior concern. It was a gap in both volume and quality, one he was currently unable to bridge. Now, the complete life was sufficient to match the great divine power, and even just half of it was far stronger than death. He could clearly discern that life and death were merging, but the latter was evidently flagging. If it continued, when the power of death exhausted itself, the transformation would declare failure. Of course, to say it failed was also somewhat inaccurate. Samsura would still be born, but the nascent well of origin would likely have to halt before the threshold of the Genesis artifact, because its foundation was unbalanced. An unbalanced Samsura, naturally, was incomplete. Forget it, it's best to cut losses in time. Although the complete Samsura wasn't built, creating a lesser one isn't a bad idea. Shaking his head slightly, Laine had no solution at the moment. Death's lacking power was predetermined by Chaos's innate nature. Thus, he stepped forward, ready to use the World Lord's power to halt this transformation. Since the complete Samsura couldn't be born, there was no need to drain all the death away, only to. What is this? Touching the well of origin with his right hand, Laine was just about to act when, to his surprise, the nascent incomplete Samsura suddenly expressed a yearning toward him. Within Laine's being, it seemed there was something even he hadn't noticed attracting it. Without stopping, Laine chose to quietly observe the changes. Thus, in the next moment, a wondrous, supremely pure breath slowly condensed from his body. It hovered in midair for a while, but eventually, following an invisible connection, it wafted toward the near-exhausted black mist in the well of origin. And when it neared the mouth of the well, the almost depleted death seemed to swell instantaneously. In just a few seconds, the black mist became just as robust as life, and its very nature elevated a degree as well. Although it hadn't reached the level of directly killing a deity, with the aid of this wondrous power, it had crossed the halfway mark. Intuition told Laine that if, at this moment, a deity actively sought death, what would happen, even he dared not be certain. But how could this be? Is it because I died once before coming to this world? No, this breath clearly doesn't belong to my death. As an astonishing development unfolded before him, Laine thought of many things in an instant. Recalling the past and watching the ongoing events, he finally comprehended many things that were previously beyond his understanding. His expression turned ice cold, but then returned to normal. He understood a lot now, but regardless, the outcome was good, and at the moment, establishing Samsura was the key. So Laine hesitated no longer and summoned the power of the 7 layers of the spirit realm. Under the World Master's great power, the nascent Samsura was embedded into the root of the 4th layer, and almost instantaneously, the ancient well expanded by millions of times, altering the entire 4th layer of the spirit realm drastically alongside. Chaos and the void were pacified, spiritual matter spread underfoot. Around the ancient well, palaces rose from the ground. Beams of light flew out from Mount Sinai, bearing several fully gestated divine artifacts. Some landed in different palaces, some entered the incubating cocoon of light, while others fell into the ancient well, awaiting further transformation. Soon, as the changes neared their end, a marvelous alteration centered around the 4th layer of the spirit realm, spreading throughout all 7 layers. Space-time became even more stable, order grew stronger, and of course, most importantly, the cycle within it was enhanced. The 4th layer of the spirit realm, already central among the 7, resonated with Samsura, symbolizing opposition and cycles. Laine could clearly feel that at this moment, the internal cycle and structural stability of the entire spirit realm surged by multiple times, and as the ancient well before him transformed the final powers of life and death, the benefits of this internal cycle became ever more evident. Even faintly, As the shaking of the external source sea had once ceased, it began again, growing ever more intense. Even though Samsara was not yet fully formed, outside the spirit realm, chaos itself also produced a blurry response. Not the contemporary part, but the truly complete will of chaos. The last time, it had been angry because of the birth of the spirit realm, but this time, it felt joy. Chapter 145, Chapter 112, Samsara_3. Of course, the world has no emotions. What we call anger and joy are merely interpretations from a human's perspective. So when it angered, it only caused the gods to intervene, and now that it is pleased, no favor has descended. However, within the spirit realm, sensing the world's response, Laine's reaction was somewhat indifferent. Pleasure, huh? Haha, how laughable, he said. Reflecting on the past, about his own history, how he transformed from an outsider's soul into a god of chaos, why he was so weak, Laine had offered explanations, but he had long discovered inconsistencies and contradictions at several points. For instance, in the original trajectory, Gaia was the first life, thus the life vase co-emerged. But now, he was the first life, so why didn't even half of the spirit-related life fall to him, instead still arriving by Mother Earth's side? Or why did memory and wisdom automatically return to the embrace of the sovereign of spirits at the moment of birth, but not others, like lies, hatred, or even desire? Far from not returning, the assimilation of these was somewhat obstructed, to the extent that the corresponding deities were still born, seemingly unaffected. Moreover, on the day the 12 Titans were born, Laine had once felt that the chaos world was quite similar to the one in his memory, except much larger, though the order of the gods' births had not changed. But everything happens for a reason. In a world, no change occurs without cause. The world grew larger. Was it merely the distortion of later myths, or had chaos gained the rule information of another complete world from an accidentally arrived life? In the past, Laine could only interpret these doubts as his insufficient understanding of the essence of spirituality and the root of the world. But with that death which did not originate from him, everything was answered. The problem was never with him, but with the world itself. Early in the beginning, when Laine had first come to this world and had not yet had the chance to awaken again as a deity, it had already instinctively tried to kill and devour this outsider. The world has no good or evil, it merely perceived that this soul was valuable yet beyond its control. So, instantly, the world's formidable power fell upon Laine, intending to eliminate this trouble once and for all. Yet to its disappointment, when it was halfway through, it found that Laine had not died. Another god had died first. One of the original 5 deities, the master of love and desire, the source of all emotions in the world, thus perished in the womb. Laine had once thought he was born and then died in an instant, but in reality, he had never truly lived. From then on, Chaos's instinct knew that killing the master of spirituality meant killing the world's spirit itself. But the cost was that a god who had not had the chance to be born in the world died silently. He thus became the first and only truly dead deity since the birth of chaos. Of course, because he had not yet been born, this death was not complete. Therefore, the world gave up on killing Laine. It tolerated his existence, but the master of spirituality who should have been born great was still left with only the weakest divine power. And the authority that the dead deity had wielded also underwent a transformation, ultimately not returning to the hands of the sovereign of spirits. Thus, the power of emotions fragmented and scattered to every corner of the world, until today. Indeed, it is just so. You lose it the way you got it, he remarked. And what should have been mine, in the end, has all come back, he added. Cronus's original time and space, Gaia's half of the life vase, even the various powers associated with spirituality drawn from chaos, were all so. They were meant to belong to him. If the world would not give them, then he would take them back by his own hands. As for those that could not return, the death they brought allowed Samsara to be complete, and in another way, they also realized their master. Understanding the cause and effect, Laine finally found answers to the doubts that had weighed on his heart for so long. He looked at the center of the 4th layer of the spirit realm, where the clear and profound dichromatic liquids intertwined, the ancient well rotating slowly. The past was past, at least now, everything was well. So Laine wielded his authority and inscribed the new divine artifact with its name. The old appellations no longer suit you. The well of origin symbolizes life, but now, you are the cycle of life and death. Thus, well of reincarnation, shall be your new name. When the world lord had spoken, it became the law. As Laine's words fell, 2 original spirit scripts were engraved on the well's wall. Briefly, With a final resonant tremble, as all life and death completed their transformation, the symbol of reincarnation was wholly perfected. In mid-air, 3 cocoons of light began to vibrate, and when reincarnation was born, the spirit realm also released its restrictions on their birth. After a crisp sound, 3 deities were successively born into this world. Unlike the original mythology, they no longer merely symbolized the 4 seasons. Spring, and the god of rebirth, Eunomia, was responsible for arranging the reincarnation of all spirits, deciding the starting point of their new lives. Summer, and the god of blessings, Dike, was responsible for arranging the talents of all spirits' future lives based on their earthly achievements, deciding the gifts of their new lives. Autumn, and the god of endings, Erinyes, was responsible for cleansing all the worldly affairs from the spirits, allowing their power to return to the spirit realm, and fundamentally transforming them for reincarnation. The birth of the 3 new gods didn't cause any extraordinary celestial phenomenon, not just because they were born in the spirit realm, but also because from the next era onwards, there would no longer be such proclamations for the birth of a deity. The world's need for gods had been satisfied, which had been foreshadowed by the divine king's son becoming a demigod. Thus, in such a tranquil manner, the 3 goddesses opened their eyes and beheld their creator, Father God. Unlike Hypnos, who was not tainted by the forces of chaos, the 3 goddesses were sincere and of one mind. They respectfully saluted the sovereign of spirits, thanking him for granting them new life. Very well. Pleased, Laine turned and looked towards the refreshed interface. From today onwards, the well of reincarnation will be under your management. This layer of the realm will also become your new abode. This is the 4th layer of the spirit realm, the all-spirit realm, or reincarnation realm, where you will be responsible for the death and rebirth of all spirits. Yes. With unified salutations, though the 3 goddesses before Laine were still feeble, they were destined to outgrow their original mythological forms and become influential existences in the world. Not only because of their new divine roles, but also because the joy of life and fear of death are innate to all beings. Willingly or not, any life that must face death will instinctively respect those who decide all aspects of life. And in the next era, this was certain to bring them abundant rewards. It's about time. The turn of the era concludes here. At last, everything was finished, and Laine felt somewhat tired. He planned to take a good rest. Meanwhile, in the outside world, at this very moment, the debate over the new king concluded. He saw everything clearly from another perspective, even quietly stoking the flames. Thus, with the arrival of the new era, a unique power was gathered by him and bestowed upon the newly born well of reincarnation. Right in front of Laine, the first great postnatal elevation since the world creation came to be. Chapter 146, Chapter 1 Questioning. The Underworld, the realm of lightless. At this moment, the birth of Samsura had just begun, and the fluctuations of the origin ocean were still imperceptible. Or, to put it another way, at this point in time, many similar changes were easily understood as normal phenomena accompanying the transition of epochs. Unlike Laine, who was busy creating Samsura, Erebus had nothing to do. He had no clue about cleansing the past and nothing else to focus on, so he simply stood on the edge of his domain as usual and gazed out into the outside world. After all, it wouldn't be long before his sister would come knocking on his door to demand accountability. "You're waiting for me." As expected. In just a short while, traversing the earth, Gaia had already arrived at the entrance to the realm of lightless. Perhaps in a bad mood, she didn't bother to greet Erebus but barged right in. Of course, this was also the reason why Erebus did not refuse her entry. Otherwise, with Gaia's power, she would not have been able to intrude. "It seems I overestimated you, Erebus. I thought you could have retired unscathed." Her voice carried a tinge of anger as Gaia stepped into the dark domain. She could faintly sense something different about this place. Now, the laws of the current world seemed to have some repulsion towards its master. This had never been the case before since her brother rarely left this realm, but now it had manifested. Clearly, the previous collision with the spirit realm not only caused Laine to choose to leave early, but Erebus had paid a price as a result too. But when Gaia thought about her own situation, she felt that the price paid was really insignificant. "That is only natural, my sister. After all, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, so there were inevitably some oversights." He smiled, undisturbed by Gaia's attitude, as the Lord of Darkness welcomed his sister. "Enough with the nonsense, Erebus. Whether it was a spur-of-the-moment decision or a premeditation, you should know why I am here." Gaia's brow furrowed slightly, but she did not expect him to admit anything. She came only intending to learn about the whereabouts of Cronus since the fake divine king had disappeared, and she needed to know where he truly was. And she believed that whether or not her brother was responsible, he would certainly know something. Indeed, my sister, if I'm not mistaken, you've come for my youngest nephew. Erebus nodded, not denying that he was aware of what Gaia was questioning him about. However, in his words, it seemed that Gaia and Pontus' 5 sea gods and 6 titans were excluded from being referred to as nephews by default. Although you won't believe it, I still want to say that I have nothing to do with his matter. Since you know I won't believe it, then don't say it. Gaia was indifferent to Erebus's defense, and she was also aware of why her brother did not recognize her other children. Among the deities of the current world, only the former Uranus was held in high regard by her brother, and thus the 5 sea gods born to Pontus were naturally ignored by him. As for the Titans, it goes without saying. Apart from Gaia herself, not many gods treated them as their own kind. Whether it's related or not, all I want to know now is, where exactly is Cronus right now? You wouldn't have fought each other for no reason. Even if it wasn't you, you couldn't possibly be ignorant about it. It was somewhat frustrating to have others' actions attributed to oneself, but considering his sister's level of wisdom, Erebus didn't find it difficult to persuade her. As for Cronus, the Lord of Darkness did indeed have some speculation. A new world had been carved out in the abyss, and from the feedback of his own power, it seemed that the true world lord might be someone else. So, after a brief contemplation, Erebus locked onto the only suspect. In the abyss. But he's probably doing quite well, so well that I've thought about trading places with him. What, you're thinking about going in there to find him? That's not a good idea. Erebus responded calmly to his sister and looked in the direction of Tartarus. Along with the secrets of the world's creation, information about the abyss had also come to light. Initially, it was filled with indistinguishable chaos, devoid of any sign of life, but perhaps in a few years, Tartarus would gradually produce matter, instinctively dividing itself in layers like the new world that had stolen its power. However, the abyss was fundamentally chaotic, and despite the emergence of different layers, the harshness of their environment could be imagined. Perhaps apart from a few, most were not suitable for the existence of life. The abyss. Again, the abyss. Gaia was frustrated thinking about how she had just released the Titans and now Cronus had entered it. No wonder she couldn't sense his presence. The abyss was beyond the current world. This made her angry yet somewhat helpless, as Tartarus was one of the few places she dared not enter carelessly. The abyss. Wouldn't care about her being a sister. Alright, I understand. I hope you haven't lied to me. I will continue to pay attention to this matter. It would be best if it really has nothing to do with you, as you've said. Gaia responded coldly, digesting the outcome. Now that she had her answer, she didn't plan on staying any longer. Although she did not know if Erebus was telling the truth, she could not enter Tartarus at the moment. The conflict with the former divine king had mainly involved the gods as support, with her being the real driving force. The impacts of the destruction were naturally second only to the former divine king. The cost belonging to Cronus had been paid through the reduced divine authority, but hers had not been settled yet. Gaia was already feeling the pressure from the current world, a sense of repulsion far stronger than that felt by Erebus. But perhaps due to the fact that the Earth was one of the core foundations of the current world, this repulsion had not actually affected her. However, past experiences had taught Gaia that while the current world might not be able to solve her, an ancient god walking within it, it always found other ways to affect her. So now, she needed to briefly return to her original form for a while, as it was her only way of resisting the world. Anyway, the dispute of the divine king had ended, and what was left was merely a matter between the brothers of Zeus. What occurred between them did not concern Gaia. Then I won't see you off, but speaking of which, have you noticed that Laine has been unusually quiet during this era's transition? Seemingly detecting Gaia's intention to leave, Erebus suddenly said. He doesn't seem like the type to sit still. If he hasn't done anything, that means his attention has been drawn to something else. Her expression flickered. Although she had told herself not to believe any accusations Laine and Erebus made about each other before her arrival, Gaia was still influenced. Her own brother seemed right, no matter how one looked at it. Laine did not appear to be the domestic type. You must understand, Gaia, as primordial gods, we may differ, but it's difficult to possess powers you're unaware of. But he's different. He predates us and is more mysterious. He opened realms and could even arbitrarily grant deity status. So, something like silently replacing the divine king. Who do you suspect more? Persuading Gaia proved just as unchallenging as the Dark Overlord had anticipated, but his goal was naturally not only to clear himself of suspicion but to find himself a useful enforcer. He resolved to find a way to cleanse his past and meanwhile, slow down Laine's rising strength, which were the only two things he wanted to do at the moment. For the former, he could only rely on himself, for the latter, he needed to recruit allies. Gaia was the first, but surely not the last. "I will consider it," she responded coldly, yet her heart was already swayed. Perhaps it was that she had never trusted that ancient god who had a history of grievances with her more than her own brother. "However, don't assume I will take your side. I won't involve myself in your affairs, huh?" "Oh." In unison, the two primordial gods detected something unusual at the same moment. Just as they had been discussing Laine's quietness in this era, a strange fluctuation emanating from the spirit realm immediately captured their attention. The essence of life and death were present within, yet they had been elevated to something higher. Gaia even noticed her life vase trembling faintly. It seemed to know that its other half would never return. "It seems reality doesn't quite match your words, my brother. He's occupied with other matters, though not of a pleasing nature, but as for you, I'm unaware of what exactly you've been up to." Holding the life vase, Gaia took a deep breath. Although she had not expected to retrieve the other half of her divine artifact, the complete loss of hope still irked her. "Indeed, I shouldn't believe a word said by people like you." With a pun intended, Gaia huffed coldly again and then swept away in a flutter of her sleeves. Now that she had discovered Cronus's whereabouts, it didn't matter who had done the rest. She needed a good sleep, and once she awoke, it wouldn't be too late to deal with these matters. How unfortunate. Shaking his head slightly, watching Gaia turn into a golden light and vanish, Erebus felt somewhat vexed. Standing at the edge of his domain, the Lord of Darkness watched his sister depart, as her form merged into the earth and her essence gradually became one with her original form. Perhaps for the next few centuries, Gaia would not reappear in the world but would maintain her original state. In the face of the sudden change, he, too, felt a bit helpless. After all, the Lord of Darkness had not foreseen that events would coincide so neatly. However, having said that, I've always held you in high esteem, yet it seems it is still not enough. This feeling, eternal recurrence, I suppose Cronus has been reborn under the influence of this force. Unfortunate, being a great divine power, its effect on me is very limited. Life, death. Perhaps, I too should let go of my arrogance and, like you, engage more with those fragile deities. Murmuring to himself, Erebus could sense that a complete great symbol was slowly taking shape. It was the first of its kind since chaos had created the world. If the Heavenly Father hadn't fallen into slumber, then even in the second era, the sky could have had the chance to reach this step. If numerous deities had not divided the seas, all the ocean and water combined in one god could have done the same. The life vase, if it hadn't been divided, could have possibly achieved this step as well, but reality does not entertain ifs. A complete great symbol, when applied to a god, implies a potential for ascension into greatness, the remaining half-step being to maintain one's personality instead of stepping forward without will, like the current primordial gods. If used on a divine artifact, it marks the birth of a Genesis artifact. Hearing of the spirit realm suddenly opening to the outside, Erebus was somewhat puzzled. His brief collision with the spirit realm had given him some understanding of its substance. Its scale was vast due to a multitude of various origins, but to consider it truly great, besides the unification of all spirituality itself, there was only the transformed Oracle Stone Tablet. With the birth of this Genesis artifact symbolizing eternal recurrence, the cycle forces of the spirit realm were bound to strengthen immeasurably. Any who dared enter without abiding by its law would be mercilessly suppressed. He did not know how strong the spirit realm suppression would be against him, but he had no intention of testing it. How terrifying, you advanced too quickly. Frowning deeply, in the end, the Dark Overlord remembered an ally who might be somewhat useful. Zeus, the future new divine king. If you can do as well as your father, then I shall begrudgingly make friends with you. Looking towards Mount Olympus, even though Erebus wasn't sure of the value in the other party, he planned to make contact. Of course, this was provided that the other could prove to be a divine king who was as decisive as he claimed. Chapter 147, Chapter 2 Controversy. When the strife upon the earth had ended, Gaia went to the underworld, and the gods returned to whence they came. Gliding through the sky, until landing upon Mount Olympus, the atmosphere among the gods was somewhat peculiar. Through many twists and turns, first came the siege on the Divine King, brimming with confidence, followed by a swift counter-suppression. Then, just as defeat seemed certain, the sun plunged into the mortal world. And before they could celebrate, the great sun was pressed into the ocean. To this day, the god of the ocean remains unconscious, and the whereabouts of the ancient god of sun are unknown. In the end, the invincible Divine King for some reason departed, leaving behind a throne that forged a connection with three deities. The position of Divine King is not one to be shared, so there must be a hierarchy established among them. Thus, the atmosphere was very delicate, so much so that the gods had not even had time to notice the newly opened surface layer of the spirit realm. My fellow deities, finally, in front of Mount Olympus, Zeus, considering something, looked around and said, "The most difficult time has passed, and we have achieved our ultimate victory. But before we celebrate, I believe we all need a little rest. I need to have a good talk with Metis about today's events. I imagine this is a common sentiment among us all." Upon hearing these words, the gods nodded in agreement. After the recent turmoil, they now felt a genuine sense of fatigue. Besides, they had somewhat guessed that Zeus and his brothers would likely discuss the matter of the Divine King's throne in private. "Go on, Zeus. I also need to take care of your foster father." Supporting the still unconscious god of the ocean, the original water goddess emphasized the words foster father. "Let's talk about the victory celebration when everyone has recovered. I reckon you brothers have some things you might want to say to each other." With an unchanged expression, Zeus nodded, then bid farewell to each deity in attendance. They all had their palaces on Mount Olympus, so there was no need for further arrangements. In the end, only the participating brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and their sister Hestia, remained. Without much exchange, the four of them looked at each other and then returned directly to the divine palace at the mountain's peak. At the entrance, a deity was waiting there. That was none other than Zeus's wife, Metis. As for his other two sisters, Demeter and Hera, they were far from ready to fight, so they had stayed above the ocean. This deity, not adept in battle but of special status, had not joined the assault on the Mount of the Gods, but she still witnessed the anomalies between heaven and earth. "Zeus, how did it go? Have you become the Divine King?" Taking quick steps, the black-haired, beautiful goddess was the first to greet him. She did not concern herself with anything else but immediately asked the most crucial question. Metis was also shocked by Cronus's power and even had some skepticism about it. However, when the last vestige of divine power left the body of the second-generation Divine King, the laws of the present world had already started to change. It was perhaps because the new king had not yet taken the throne, so this change had not yet fully taken effect. Thus, whether they had fought or not, the gods were very clear that the former Divine King was no longer present. Not yet. After a pause, Zeus knew that Metis must have noticed the awkward atmosphere among the brothers. She still asked the question at this moment, clearly not just seeking a simple answer. She was hinting that Zeus was the expected choice of most, that the majority of deities still supported him, and she was reminding him to quickly draw conclusions on these matters, rather than waiting for the gods to gather before deciding. A king elected by others does not hold as much authority as one who decides for himself. Metis, the father god, has abdicated, but the new king has not been decided. Despite knowing this was not very likely, Zeus said. "However, if no one objects to me." "Wait." Before he could finish, as expected, Poseidon interjected. "Now, the throne of the Divine King is linked to all three of us. Zeus, I think there's still room for discussion. Hades, what do you think?" Without immediately responding, Zeus turned to his other brother. In the past, Hades had rarely ever disagreed with him on most matters, and Zeus hoped this time would be the same. But the outcome disappointed him. Although Hades was not as vehement as Poseidon, he still tactfully expressed his own opinion. "Speaking solely of the throne, let's set that aside for the moment. But Zeus, the past of our father god and his brothers does indeed worry me a great deal. The future lord of the underworld actually never saw himself as the Divine King. After all, the status of the underworld in the present world was awkward, or rather, its very existence was awkward. While the essences of the four primordial gods encircled that place and it boasted an environment almost like a realm unto itself, be it the nether moon or the river of vows, their masters were powerful deities, no less significant than him. However indifferent he felt, Hades was not averse to seeking some advantage for himself. They had all seen how Cronus had treated the god of sun and the two sea gods. Who knew what Zeus might do in the future for the sake of his own authority? The god of the underworld was indeed a man of few words, but he was well aware that this was when his brothers were at their weakest. If Zeus was unwilling to give his two elder brothers anything now, what the future held was clear without asking. At the very least, the other party needed to give him an attitude that would put him at ease. But you all know very well, whether it's the role played in the overthrow of our Heavenly Father or the prophecy once left by him, I am the new divine king, and that's indisputable. Setting aside any wishful thinking, Zeus finally got serious. And aside from substituting curse with prophecy, what he was saying was true indeed. Ahem. At that, Zeus's eldest sister, the goddess of fire and protector, Hestia, let out a slight cough. The battle that had just concluded had left her thoroughly exhausted, for although she couldn't threaten the divine king herself, she had continually used her authority to bolster protection for the gods. But now, faced with the dispute between her two younger brothers, she still mustered her spirit. This was hardly the time for their brotherly conflict to arise. Poseidon, Zeus makes sense, based on his merits, he is indeed more suited to become the divine king. I think there's no need for you to argue over this. Even if he were to relinquish the throne, the sea gods would not accept you as the divine king. Fie. Poseidon scoffed coldly, yet he still held some respect for his elder sister. And she was right, the deities of the stars were mostly neutral, and those who truly stood by Zeus were essentially the deities under the two sovereigns of the seas. Therefore, whether they would accept another deity who could be seen as a sea god becoming the divine king was rather obvious. But he was not about to give up. Turning to Zeus, perhaps enticed by the position of divine king, Poseidon unexpectedly caught a loophole in Zeus's words with surprising precision. Yes, the prophecy. Let's not discuss whether it is a prophecy or a curse for now, but could the words of the previous divine king serve as the basis for your succession? Uranus was overthrown by the consensus of the deities. If his words can also be used as a basis, are you suggesting the deities of the past were all mistaken? His eyes narrowing slightly, Zeus had not anticipated that his normally less shrewd brother would speak so cuttingly. From the perspective of the world, a curse left by a god-given divine king could lend legitimacy to Zeus, but from the perspective of the deities, he indeed could not use it as grounds for ascending to the throne. And what have you done, Poseidon? Have you forgotten, or was it not I who rescued you from the belly of our father god? If you have any dignity left as a member of the deity race, you wouldn't speak to me like this. The voice was ice cold. Although Poseidon's power had risen with the changing climate of the world, he was still no match for Zeus. The Cyclops were indeed excellent craftsmen. Perhaps the arrow of thunder may not have been as effective against great divine power, but if the opponent was Poseidon, Zeus could do with one hand. He would only need to hold the divine artifact with that hand. Chapter 148, Chapter 3 Discovery. If that's the case, Zeus, none of us is the true hero in the path of overthrowing the father god. However, across from Zeus, Poseidon clearly wasn't going to back down so easily. He avoided discussing the so-called merits, because Poseidon knew he couldn't surpass his opponent. It is the honored Mother Earth who is key, isn't it? Without her, your so-called salvation could never have succeeded. Without her, what do we have today to persist until the Father God departed? If accomplishments are to decide the divine king's position, then it should be up to Mother Earth to make a fair judgment, not for you to receive it on your own. Sinking at heart, Zeus knew full well the other party was twisting words, but he still couldn't refute. He had been confident before because between himself and Poseidon, the gods certainly seemed to favor him a little more. But if Gaia were to judge, and if she truly stood with Poseidon, the gods might not necessarily object. The gods of today had just witnessed the strength of Mother Earth, even among the sea gods. Probably only Oceanus would dare to dispute the speech of the other side. If he were still sane, he would never let Poseidon ascend to the throne. But unfortunately, the stretch of black clouds spanning hundreds of thousands of miles over the East Sea showed them what had just happened there. With the former divine king's suppression gone, the sun, at last, returned weakly to where it belonged. But the consequences brought by the sun-bathed East Sea were far from over. So, Poseidon, do you really intend to let the respected Mother Earth decide the position of the divine king? In the silence, Metis, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Just now, for some reason, she felt a strange fluctuation in her authority, but she hadn't noticed any problem. Zeus, being a judge in his own cause, was deluded, but she saw clearly. Although Poseidon was unexpectedly clever today, this, in turn, proved that he didn't actually want Mother Earth to decide everything. Back when Cronus had just ascended to the throne, to avoid sharing the same land with Gaia, he chose to anger her away by refusing to release the Titans. If Poseidon really let Mother Earth make the decision, wouldn't he be acknowledging Mother Earth's supremacy over the Divine King, no matter the outcome? Although, from what it seems, the new Divine King would indeed find it hard to establish higher prestige among the gods than Mother Earth. In the world of the gods, the name itself also carried significant meaning. Just as Cronus did not truly become Divine King until the gods acknowledged him 500 years later, if even the Divine King himself admitted to being below Mother Earth, then his power would necessarily be hard to secure. She's right, Poseidon, my brother, you wouldn't make such a foolish choice, would you? As these words were spoken, Zeus suddenly came to his senses. Everything Poseidon said before was probably more about bargaining with him, so he once again looked seriously at his two brothers. Especially at the one he had previously considered a bit arrogant and inept, whose performance today had greatly altered his opinion. Poseidon and Hades, speak frankly. What is it you want to do? We all know very well that there are some things that cannot be done. Indeed, we are ultimately family. Hestia too spoke up, but she also saw through the thoughts of the other two brothers, so she didn't favor one over the other. However, Zeus, you ought to grant your brothers what is due to them, not be like our father who in the end had not a single god willing to help him. A smile surfaced on Poseidon's face. He hadn't really expected to be able to contend with his opponent anyway. He needed supporters, his own forces, so standing in the center of the Great Hall, the future Sea Emperor slowly began to speak. I just feel that you might need help, Zeus. You can become the Divine King, and I as a member of the Olympus Pantheon can stand with you in the future against the Titans who once ruled the world. But you need to give me what is due. Give me the sea, swear on the Styx River that you will never covet it, and we will always stand together. With his eyes slightly narrowed, Zeus wasn't really willing in his heart. But thinking about the vague connection between his opponent and the Divine King's position, he still didn't refuse. Moreover, if he really refused, Hestia might not support him anymore. Very well. His gaze turned icy. Zeus looked at his brother and spoke emphatically. Since you're so confident, then let you take charge of the sea for Olympus. However, since Oceanus is the father of Metis, I will not help you oppose him. That is enough, I will find a way on my own. Unbeknownst to when it began, the goddess of wisdom felt that strange fluctuation of authority had disappeared again. And before her, when Poseidon heard the words of Zeus, he agreed without hesitation. And what about you, Hades? Besides the underworld, do you need anything else? Unlike Poseidon, Hades's control over the underworld was unquestionable, and although 9/10 of the underworld belonged to the present world, the borders with the abyss, as well as some special places, were not the same. Therefore, in fact, both past and present divine kings had never coveted the underworld. It was like the remote territories of future feudal dynasties, valued only for exiling officials and the symbolic extent of the land, with virtually no actual benefits. Thus, Zeus naturally assumed that the other party had other demands. Me. I actually don't want much. If you wish, consider that you owe me a condition, one that doesn't affect your authority or power. Shaking his head, Hades did not propose any additional conditions. The world was only so large, and Zeus would not cede the sky to him. As for that requirement, what he really thought was that perhaps one day in the future, he might have Zeus, in the name of Divine King, persuade Demeter to become his queen of the underworld. He did not care about the desires between men and women, as long as his sister agreed to bring vitality to the underworld, he could even overlook what she did afterwards. Good. Somewhat surprised, but happy, Zeus realized that his eldest brother was not as ambitious as Poseidon. Since that's settled, let the Styx River witness your agreement today. The division of the fruits of victory among family members finally came to an easing of the atmosphere. At this point, the eldest sister Hestia suddenly mentioned something. Speaking of which, have you noticed that something seems to have appeared around us recently? Visibly intrigued, Zeus also sensed around, and the next moment, as if he had discovered something, he extended his hand forward and drew a gentle stroke in the air. Before him, a world in shades of black and white slowly emerged. There was no difference between this place and the outside world, except that everything seemed to have lost its color, and there were no signs of life. The deities were somewhat surprised. This was a place they had never encountered before. What is this place? Zeus asked, somewhat astonished. realizing for the first time that there were places in the world he did not understand. Perhaps, we could take a look. Poseidon turned and glanced at Metis. Without this woman, Zeus would not have been so difficult to deal with. Are you coming with us? Though gods do not die, and we are all powerful true gods, such unknown territories might not be suitable for you. Wisdom indeed was a powerful godhood, but the speed at which it accumulated divine power was unimaginably slow in the current era. You're right, I'll just stay here. Ignoring Poseidon's implicit mockery, the goddess of wisdom was not afraid of danger, just that now was somewhat different. Without any surprise, she was already bearing the first offspring for the soon-to-be third-generation divine king. Chapter 149, 4 Open Interfaces. Mentor, what is this place? In the monochrome world, two figures of varying sizes walked on the sea surface. Unlike the surrounding environment, they were the only beings with color nearby. I feel there is a kind of power here that is very beneficial to the spirit. It exists in the present world too, but it is extremely rare. Facing the mentor he had acknowledged not long before, Chiron tried to bow down to align himself with his mentor's height. But it was pointless. As a half-human, half-horse being, the red-haired witch was only as tall as the horse part of him. This is the spirit realm, the first layer of the spirit realm, the phantasmal spirit realm. It is a counterpart of the surface world, you should be able to tell. Other than the difference in color, there is not much difference from the outside world. Even if you destroy the environment here, it will gradually restore itself over time. Casually shattering a giant rock on a distant island, under the gaze of the centaur beside her, without any apparent force, the rock pieces soon began to rebuild themselves. You need not concern yourself with this place, after all, you also have divinity. The first two layers of the spirit realm are of limited significance to you. Next time you enter, there's no need to come in person. I myself mostly entered in the form of a spiritual body. Answering offhandedly, she strolled across the monochrome sea surface, with Hecate seeming to search for something. Just like she said, in the past, she more often entered the spirit realm in spirit, not bodily. The phantasmal spirit realm was somewhat quiet today, the spiritual bodies that were often seen were nowhere to be found. Hecate didn't find this strange, after all, such turmoil had just erupted over the East Sea, and even though lower spiritual bodies mostly act on instinct, they knew to seek advantage and avoid harm. Of course, there was another possibility, because the portal to the spirit realm had opened, letting some of the sun's power seep in, burning them all away. Found it. After searching for half an hour, Hecate seemed to have discovered something. She casually grabbed the mane on Chiron's back, and in a blink, they appeared at the very edge of their vision. There, in midair, a ring of light floated from nowhere, with slight ripples of space around it. At its center, a much richer aura of spirituality emanated from within. Mentor, what is this? Asking again, the centaur felt he indeed was a bit ignorant before. This is a passageway connecting the first and second layers of the spirit realm. They are everywhere in the first layer. Cross it, and you can enter the second layer of the spirit realm. The corners of her mouth lifted, as if she thought of something amusing. Hecate, looking at her unwitting apprentice who had been caught spying and then thoroughly beaten, smiled with ill intent. Little Chiron, with your divinity, you should be able to directly sense the second layer of the spirit realm. In fact, you don't need to go the normal route, and you can enter it. Do you want to give it a try? No need. The response was very decisive. Although they had only known each other for half a day, the young centaur had come to understand some of his mentor's character. Dying was probably not on the cards. But if he really dared to try, the outcome probably wouldn't be very pleasant. Is that so? What a shame. Seeing his refusal, Hecate felt slightly regretful, but she still explained earnestly. Actually, if you were a pure spirit realm life form, this kind of direct breakthrough wouldn't pose any problem. For them, it is a form of advancement, a natural act when their own power reaches a certain point, and at most when entering the next layer of the spirit realm. The location where they appear might be a bit random, unlike this fixed portal. However, for outsiders, if they don't follow the rules, they will likely be refused entry and then punished differently according to their strength. Hecate's explanation couldn't help but prompt an as-expected expression on the centaur's face. He knew there would be problems not following the rules. He prepared to inquire about this so-called punishment, but the next moment, Chiron found that his mentor's face showed a look of surprise. Haha, I knew it. There are always fools, I mean, individuals not as cautious as you who just barge in directly. Come, follow me to have a look. It seems to be in the west. Without waiting for a response, she grabbed the centaur's back hair and Hecate took another step forward. This time, however, Chiron clearly perceived that unlike the short-distance spatial shift before, he had directly broken through two barriers. In his perception, one of those barriers was the second layer of the spirit realm, which they had just been warned not to enter by force. After breaking through the two barriers, a fleeting and bizarre scene flashed by. It seemed as if they had only walked a few steps there before they were back in the first layer of the spirit realm the next moment. Spiritual realm shuttle. With the help of the chaotic spacetime characteristics of the higher spirit realm, the two of them arrived in the eastern region of the continent in a short time. In this place, several beings emanating waves of divine power were clashing with unknown life forms, but the power they displayed was far less formidable than in the real world. Damn it, what the hell is this place? Under the oppressive force of the dimensional barrier, only a fraction of his divine power remained. Zeus brandished the arrow of thunder in his hand, and a silver light exploded out of nowhere, shooting towards the entity in front of him. Yet, the being that looked no different from a deity only let out a cold laugh and effortlessly deflected the thunderbolt, which was supposed to be unblockable, with a golden shield. It wasn't that the power of the divine artifact was lacking, but rather the suppression here was too terrifying. Zeus could feel that his previous arbitrary actions had incensed the world itself, as though the entire world was pressing down on him, and he even caught a glimpse of the phantom of a bronze book. That phantom seemed like the core of order, vastly intensifying the suppression of the interface's power, rendering him utterly powerless before this unknown life form. Zeus, who gave you permission to act recklessly? How are we to return now? With a similarly grim expression, Poseidon loudly questioned Zeus. Although he too had sensed several layers of the world and wanted to directly see inside, he had not yet made a move. It was Zeus who tried to step into the third layer of the world and had taken action, only to end up in the territory of this unknown life form. Although this life form looked like a deity and possessed power similar to divine power and wisdom, Poseidon was certain he was not a deity. If his power weren't so immense, he would have thought it was one of the so-called humans who once worshipped the deities as spoken about among the gods. Enough, stop arguing. By the side, Hestia, the goddess of fire and the hearth, intervened to stop the argument between the two brothers. She was aware that both were somewhat dissatisfied with the previous distribution of power. They were in the middle of a battle now, and arguing directly was out of the question. It seemed that power was truly alluring, for it made Poseidon appear like a deity capable of contemplation. Respect it. Sir, we did not mean to offend you. Flames of red ignited, and within their domain all forces with hostile intentions were diminished. Hestia looked at the being in front of them, attempting to negotiate a resolution. We merely discovered the ability to enter here by accident, and entered your territory inadvertently. If this has caused you any displeasure, we are willing to. I know you had no intention. Ethereal tones sounded, interrupting Hestia's words. Unlike the language used among gods, the language of this foreign life form was unknown, but amazingly, it was understood directly by the several deities listening. But I do. The voice was detached as Aaron's form shone with light, transforming into thousands of radiant arrows that collided with the four deities opposite him. Deities are not such good things after all. He did not know what he was, a spirit realm being, part of the golden humanity, or a new life form that, in the process of mutual devouring, inherited the memories of both. Nevertheless, from the moment the new consciousness emerged, Aaron felt disgusted thinking about how he once worshipped the deities. Now, with the great ancient spirit world above, he was determined to properly discipline these unfamiliar deities. Chapter 155 Escape. Boom. The transparent arrows made of water flow and lightning collided, and those that penetrated were blocked by the power of protection. Laine's attack was blocked. As a lord of the spirit realm who had created his dream domain in the phantasmal spirit realm, he was akin to a territorial god skilled in combat outside his own dream domain. If the four deities before him weren't suppressed by the realm's forces, he wouldn't even qualify to oppose them. But that didn't matter, as a cold smile appeared on Aaron's lips. This was the spirit realm. As the lord of the spirit realm, unless another of equal or greater rank nullified his authority, his power here was inexhaustible. By contrast, although the deity's divine power was immense, how long it could be sustained under the pressure of the realm's forces was uncertain. Clang. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from behind Aaron. A figure wearing armor wielded a long dagger, stabbing towards the enemy and piercing through Aaron's body. Crash. The next moment, Aaron's form exploded and then reformed at a distance. What a troublesome divine artifact. Upon exploding and reforming, the Lord of the Spirit Realm's figure had become much more ethereal. With his power suppressed, the properties of the cloak of invisibility stood out. After all, it was not famous for its strength. While it had no other uses, it was nearly unparalleled in concealing one's form. We have no intention of being your enemy, but if you persist, we're not to be trifled with. Hades' voice was as calm as ever. He could sense that the other did not possess the immortal essence of a deity. Under these circumstances, the opponent might not wish to engage them to the end. Ah, perhaps, but alas, this is the spirit realm, not your world. With a disdainful smile, Aaron showed no sign of backing down. Indeed, he was not immortal like the gods, but to kill him, one would have to destroy the dream domain he had created in the phantasmal spirit realm as well. Merely killing him on the outside was pointless, it would at most damage his vital essence, forcing him to retreat to his territory to await rebirth. Spirit realm. Even though Zeus was annoyed by the opponent's reaction, his sharp mind latched onto the key point in his words. He had been pondering what this place was, and now he finally had an answer. The spirit realm, speculated to have originated in the first era, was a realm like the land of eternal night and the realm of lightness, overseen by an ancient god. Like the previous two, almost no gods were known to enter or leave, and its ruler seemed to deliberately avoid contact with the outside world. That god made rare appearances. The last was at the beginning of the second era, when he participated in the creation of the original life forms and released a monster on Mount Otherworld capable of devouring the sun. To this day, the beast still appeared every few decades or centuries, causing the great sun to lose its light. Unfortunately, Zeus was too young to have witnessed it. We need to prepare to leave. The ruler of this place has dealt with the father god before, and we have no clue what he would do if he discovered us. With thoughts as quick as lightning, Zeus spoke out. What, father god? Compared to Zeus, Poseidon had only truly emerged into the world 10 years ago. He was genuinely ignorant of this. Yes, we can talk about these things once we're back, but now. Blocking another attack with lightning, Zeus began to contemplate how to leave. Suddenly, a strange presence emanated from the depths of the spirit realm. The presence was twofold, one part somewhat resembled Mother Earth's golden apple, but the other part was very foreign. Their expressions changed, and the actions of those present momentarily faltered. Faintly, it seemed as if the forces of the realm were converging towards the core of the spirit realm, as if something significant was occurring. Let's go. Almost instantly, the deities felt the oppressive force of the realm lessen and hurriedly seized the opportunity to leave. Zeus led the way out of the spirit realm, with the other three deities following closely behind. In the face of sudden change, Aaron had no time to stop them, or rather, he was not a match for the four deities who had regained some of their power. Damn it. Some annoyance welled up within him. He hadn't expected these gods to be anything like the proud beings he remembered. They fled without a moment's hesitation. Even if they didn't flee, it was unlikely he could actually harm the immortal gods anyway. Who? His annoyance still fresh, Aaron turned to look behind him, where two figures had apparently been observing for a while. You are, that Hecate. Although his memory was somewhat hazy, Aaron still recognized the figure before him. The infant who had once been cast down from Mount of the Gods, the sinner born of celestial fire. One day, the figure suddenly disappeared without a trace, and golden humanity had searched for a time. When they found nothing, they engraved the story on stone tablets. But now, it seemed that the figure had also become a deity. Although both were gods, Aaron did not dislike her. Tales of mortals ascending to godhood were long told in the spirit realm. It was said that even the angels who wandered between the seven realms were not innately sacred. They were granted divinity by the very essence of the spirit realm itself, which allowed them to wield divine authority. It is I, are you a human? Surprised, she hadn't expected that he would recognize her. She thought hard for a moment. In Hecate's memory, Aaron did bear some resemblance to a person from the human tribes at the foot of Mount Otherworld. But weren't golden humanity only known for their adoration of the deities? No, I am not a human. I am the lord of the spirit realm, chosen by the will of the great ancient spirit world. The frail and ignorant existence of humans has nothing to do with me. He flatly denied Hecate's designation, feeling that emotional past, being set up, was a disgrace. A demigod. Has the current age indeed given birth to demigods? I had only encountered a demigod, an evil spirit who presided over dreams, in the presence of Lord Hypnos before. I didn't expect such beings to exist in the outside world as well. Next to Hecate, the large centaur was difficult not to notice. Aaron simply observed for a moment before recognizing the other's true nature. Yes, he is my apprentice. But I don't find golden humanity to be weak. With a slight frown of her perfectly shaped brows, just one sentence was enough to make Hecate take an instant dislike to this fellow. Therefore, she decided not to say more and turned instead to look in the direction of Mount Olympus. The first layer of the spirit realm was a reflection of the outside world. If something existed outside, it naturally existed here as well. However, with Laine opening the channel for communication between the spirit realm and the real world, one could feel the presence of spiritual bodies from the first two layers of the spirit realm, even outside of it. So, like before, standing in front of you without being detectable had become quite difficult, at least for beings without control over the core powers of the spirit realm. Let's go, little Chiron, I will take you to meet that golden mane. Hecate rarely concealed her emotions. She disliked that individual turned from golden humanity, so she simply ignored him. Giving a casual wave to Chiron, Hecate stepped into the real world in one stride, appearing just outside the true Mount Olympus. Alright, mentor. With an apologetic smile to Aaron, Chiron followed immediately after Hecate. Aaron simply gave a nonchalant expression in return, and thus the spirit realm layer near Olympus was once again deserted. This place, like the East Sea, didn't harbor any ordinary spirit realm life forms. Because Mount Olympus itself possessed power, so too did its projection in the phantasmal spirit realm. By instinct, weaker spirits were disinclined to approach this place. Hecate, huh? Watching the direction of their departure, Aaron pondered deeply. Having become a deity but with no sign of being suppressed by the realm, she must also be an emissary chosen in the mortal world by the will of the great ancient spirit world, just like Lord Hypnos. But to think, the channel between the spirit realm and the real world has been opened. To prevent those deities from wreaking havoc here, it seems I need to seek some allies. Perhaps as a mix of official business and personal vendetta, Aaron simply assumed that the deities would damage the spirit realm. Outside, he was still no match for them. But within the spirit realm, particularly in the third layer, the situation might just be turned on its head. Chapter 151, 6 Astrology. Whoosh. Outside Mount Olympus, the void shook for a moment, and the next instant, 4 deities flew out from it in succession. Previously, due to the skirmish with that unknown entity, the group was no longer at the location where they had entered before. Because the phantasmal spirit realm corresponded one-to-one with the mortal world, they appeared not far from the outside of Mount Olympus. Uff. We finally made it out. Zeus, if you hadn't forcibly broken through the realm barrier, even with it suppressing us, it wouldn't have been this intense. Taking a deep breath, Poseidon was the first to repeat Zeus's mistake, which caused the golden-haired deity some annoyance. Is that so? You might not be aware of what that place was. It was the domain of the primordial gods, and even by doing nothing, there was no telling if we would encounter danger. Poseidon, I can forgive your ignorance, but today's experience should have made you realize the reality of our situation, right? He retorted casually, feeling an even stronger sense of urgency. About the several reckless of ancient gods, Zeus knew not much, but compared to the twin gods of the Dark Night, there were at least some records of this lord of the spirit realm. Rumors had it that his power was not strong in itself, merely possessing many powerful divine artifacts. However, rumors are always unreliable, and without a doubt, based on today's encounter, at least he was a deity similar to Mother Earth, yet he seemed not to be friendly towards the deities of the present world. The suddenly opened realm barrier, the life form full of hostility toward the deities, and the innate suppression of the barrier itself. Although if he hadn't tried to forcibly enter the third layer of the spirit realm, the suppression from the barrier wouldn't have been so intense, but it was still not a good sign. Perhaps, after an eon had passed, that primordial god born at the dawn of creation was no longer satisfied with living in seclusion, like the twin gods of the Dark Night who wanted nothing to do with worldly affairs. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the world, just like Mother Earth. It seems that at tomorrow's celebration of the division of the spoils of victory, he too needed to make a statement, attempting to reach out to this deity in the name of the Divine King. If it was a visit known by all the gods, it should not result in too dire an outcome, right? Tomorrow we shall gather all the gods, and in their presence, announce the establishment of the new divine court. The terms I've agreed to with you before will also be communicated to them in a more reasonable form. He said gravely, looking around at those present. especially his original second brother. Although still somewhat reluctant, Poseidon, along with Hades, nodded in agreement. Since that's settled, let us, His expression changed slightly. Zeus turned to look at the place from where the four had just left the spirit realm. At first, he was a bit on guard, but then relaxed. He thought perhaps the life form from the spirit realm was pursuing them again, but instead, it was a familiar figure in red. So, had she just been watching from the side? Golden Mane, have you been beaten up again? The voice arrived before the person did. With a ripple of magic, a red-dressed goddess emerged in front of the four deities, followed by a being with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse. An unexpected combat, nothing more. We could say it was a draw, but why are you here? Feeling somewhat embarrassed internally, Zeus did not show it. He put on a brave face and introduced the somewhat perplexed trio to the goddess in front of them. Hecate, whom I've mentioned before. The grand sorceress who prepared potions for me. Of course, she is now the goddess of the magic net. She is proficient in potions and witchcraft and, besides, possesses an astrology akin to prophecy. Astrology. The words Zeus spoke earlier were not taken to heart by several deities. They were powerful gods themselves, but astrology was different. In the original myths, deities like Phoebe, Themis, Gaia, and Apollo had all held sway over the oracle stone tablet at one time or another, so prophecy was considered a relatively common ability among the gods. But now things were different. The first and second generation titans were one thing, but some third generation titans, or gods like Zeus who had emerged in more recent years, had never witnessed a true prophecy. They only knew, directly or indirectly, that some of the primordial gods held powers related to fate, and that the succession of power among the early divine kings was indeed influenced by destiny. Therefore, they harbored a certain dread and yearning towards prophecy. What an esteemed guest indeed, Olympus welcomes your arrival, Princess Hecate. Zeus's elder sister Hestia replied with a gentle smile. She hadn't thought too much about it. Long ago, despite never having met her, she had already taken a liking to the goddess who had helped them escape from the belly of their father. Tomorrow is the day of the new king's ascension and the celebration with all the gods. Given that Zeus once received your aid, you should have a place at this feast as well. A celebration, huh? Little Chiron, what do you think? Initially here just for amusement, Hecate was indifferent about staying or leaving after witnessing the event. She had previously gone to the spirit realm to teach a new apprentice, and also because of what the stone tablet said, there might be something to comprehend. She already knew what it was, but the cycle of life and death's power was too profound. Hecate had merely noted it down. As for the former reason, now that this hospitable goddess had extended an invitation, whether to waste time here naturally also depended on whether the little apprentice wished to stay. Since the noble highnesses invite me, I have no reason to refuse. Faced with Hecate's question and the gazes of four powerful deities upon him, the centaur promptly agreed. Honestly, his opinions were a facade. If this newly acknowledged mentor didn't wish to mingle, he would have declined decisively. Then let's go, Golden Mane. Do you have a place to stay here? Seeing her apprentice got her hint, Hecate nodded in satisfaction and then turned to ask Zeus. Yes, we do, and you can actually call me Zeus. Zeus nodded and was about to give her directions when he suddenly stopped. Come with me, it's over there. I'll show you the way. A thought struck him, recalling astrology, and Zeus changed his mind. He led the way for Hecate and Chiron to an unoccupied divine palace on Mount Olympus. This is the place. Not too shabby, right? After parting ways with the other three deities, two gods and a horse landed outside a palace built on a flattened area halfway up Mount Olympus. Zeus spoke with a hint of pride. The Cyclops were the finest craftsmen but not strong warriors. After forging divine artifacts for Zeus, they were put in charge of constructing the buildings all over Olympus. In terms of skill, they indeed reached the pinnacle, far beyond ordinary people. Compared to the divine palaces that Zeus had seen over the ocean, these were undoubtedly much more exquisite. Mediocre, the builders are good, but the style lacks innovation. I guess the designer probably didn't have much talent for art. Hecate commented offhandedly, and although she had already guessed these palaces were probably designed by Zeus, she didn't care if he felt embarrassed. All these palaces of the gods look the same, thinking a change in relief and addition of a column makes it a new style, truly uninspired. Is there anything else? If not, be quick and leave. With a wave of her hand, Hecate showed no interest in making further conversation with Zeus. Although he knew that the goddess before him was not targeting him specifically, as she was the same with most deities, Zeus still felt somewhat uncomfortable. But there was nothing he could do. After all, he was the one in need of favor, so he chose to overlook it. Moreover, there was no conflict of interest between them, and Zeus, at least for now, didn't care about such trifles in speech. Remembering the purpose of his visit, his gaze darkened for a moment. Although he was prepared, he did not know what result he would obtain from Hecate. It might be good, or it might not, but either way, he needed to know the outcome. Glancing at Chiron, the centaur beside him, Chiron immediately understood his intention. However, he did not make a decision on his own and instead gave Hecate a cue. Go ahead, I'll listen to what he has to say. Yes, teacher. Seeing that his newly acquainted teacher showed no objections, Chiron quickly left the vicinity. Speak, what is it? Casually turning the earth into a chair, Hecate sat upon it and asked Zeus. I guess it's either about witchcraft or astrology, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't come to me. After a moment of silence, as if he was organizing his words, Zeus finally, hesitantly, asked. I heard you say before, astrology can foresee the future. Oh. Raising her eyebrows, Hecate straightened her body and looked at the deity before her. So you want to know what, exactly? Like the ancient legends, whether or not you are the eternal divine king. Recalling the stories told by the oracle stone tablet, the previous two divine kings had fallen due to prophecies of the ancient gods. Could it be that it was now her turn, and the third prophecy was to unfold today? This piqued Hecate's interest greatly. Divining the future of a divine king, even with his consent, was a decidedly challenging task. But thinking about the significance of the act itself, she felt as though she was personally crafting history. Perhaps, millions of years from now, the gods would still remember that Hecate foretold the fall of a divine king on Mount Olympus. No, you misunderstand. Shaking his head and seeing the slightly disappointed look in the eyes of the red-haired goddess before him, Zeus declined. Prophecy is a shackle. The fates of 2 generations of divine kings have already proven this. How could I willingly place it upon my own neck? Then what do you want to know? Feeling somewhat disinterested, Hecate asked nonchalantly. After hesitating for a while, under Hecate's increasingly impatient gaze, Zeus finally spoke. Let's talk about the divine king later. For now, I just want to know. Recently, my wife Metis became pregnant. I want to know, what kind of achievements will the child in her womb have in the future? As night was about to fall, the illumination became somewhat dim in front of Hecate. Zeus's features were a bit unclear. She could only hear his voice as if it was coming from afar. I mean no offense, but as a father, it's difficult not to be concerned. Boom. As night approached, a dim glow spread over the Mount of the Gods, enhancing the sanctity and tranquility of Mount Olympus in contrast with the celestial phenomena of the outside world. Yet suddenly, a thunderous boom resonated above Mount Olympus, capturing the attention of numerous deities, who then promptly disregarded it. This was not something that surprised them. Most assumed it was Zeus and his brothers arguing for the throne. In fact, they too were eager to know what the outcome would be tomorrow. After a long while, when the cloak of the Lady of Night fully shrouded the sky, Zeus walked out of the divine palace with his usual demeanor. As if nothing had happened, he casually summoned a nymph. After she bowed respectfully, the future divine king gave her a nonchalant order. The celebration feast will soon begin. I have heard that Themis, who presides over the laws, is just and strict. I hope that tomorrow, she will come to witness me ascending as the new king. Go and invite her. Tell her that if she is willing to come, I would like her to serve as the adjudicator in the new divine court, to judge the right and wrong and reward and punishment of all things in the world when I am unable to decide. I believe all gods will trust her judgment. Yes, Your Majesty. With a slight bow, the nymph immediately went to fulfill the command. This had been decided long ago, and had there not been a delay, Zeus would not have arranged it now. With all matters settled, he gazed towards the western sky, lost in thought. The Father God took his sister as the Queen of Gods, and as his successor, I should learn from his example. The god of the ocean's lineage is still too powerful, and the ancient sea god no longer concerns himself with affairs. As a qualified divine king, I should not give them the chance to grow stronger. And then. Yes, and destiny too. Maybe this is destiny's choice. The Queen of Gods should be taken by a deity with more potential. Finally, after a period of silence as if convincing himself with these seemingly reasonable thoughts, Zeus stood for a while before turning around and heading towards his palace. Tomorrow would be the day he became divine king. On such a crucial day, he could not afford to be late. Chapter 152. 7. Two Roads. The night gradually enveloped the land. Atop Mount of the Gods, the deities were about to witness the birth of a new king, while beneath the silence of the night, the shifting tides of the origin sea at the turn of the era concealed many secrets unknown to man. Thousands of miles away, on a high mountain beside the Delphic Great Plains, two figures quietly watched the humans who had survived nearby. Those were the Silver Humanity. They had endured many hardships, yet had miraculously survived. Struggling against the calamitous climate, they were probably unaware that before long, they would be erased by the new king. The earth had no need for them, and the gods loathed them. Perhaps it was as Mephisto, the once leader of the Silver Humanity, had said, "Let us all die, or let them all listen to us." Now the one who spoke these words was working towards the latter, but the remaining Silver Humanity was about to live out the former. Unlike the Golden Humanity, they hadn't managed to leave any relics to proclaim their existence. "A bunch of humans, is that why you brought me here? I really don't see anything worth watching." The figure concealed beneath the black dress was somewhat hazy, her tall form unseen by anyone, riddled with mystery like the night itself. Standing by Laine's side, Nyx's attitude was as usual. "There is nothing worth watching right now." Rubbing his temples, Laine felt somewhat exhausted. During the day, he had fought two primordial gods in succession and then opened up Samsura. Not long before, he had also secretly observed a special change, so although Laine's divine body had recovered as usual, even better than before because of the birth of Samsura, he still felt somewhat listless. Nevertheless, he had long invited Nyx out for a walk after a long time, preparing to thank her for her biased actions before, and incidentally to understand why she had done so. But it will be different in the future. You feel it too, don't you? Because of the recent battle, shackles for all deities will soon descend upon this world. Soon, the earth will reject divine power, and other places will also be restricted to varying degrees. Even gods cannot resist the world itself and can only choose to comply. And with the loss of divine intervention, at least direct intervention, in the future Third Age, mortals will be the masters of the earth. Under his black robe, Laine couldn't help but marvel at how useful Nyx's previous gift had been. As for the current laws of the world, hiding in history wasn't very effective. After all, from the world's perspective, the past and present weren't much different. But secrecy was different. This black robe, woven from the fabric gifted by the Lady of the Night, concealed his presence very well. As long as he did not use divine power, he would not be discovered. Luckily, the gods would soon be unable to use their divine power on Earth as well, so in this sense, everyone was not much different. Speaking of which, I'm actually a bit curious. With a smile, Laine turned to look at Nyx, whose face was indistinct and changing. "What was your reason for deciding to stand with me before?" When the spirit realm and the realm of Lightless collided, Nyx was there by the sidelines, which Laine keenly noticed. If she were there to help the Lord of Darkness, she could have intervened directly, and probably the Divine King would have had to hastily depart without much conversation with the good children. Since she didn't act, there was only one explanation. She intended to block Erebus's assault for him, but seeing that he could handle it, she didn't interfere. Yet Laine truly couldn't understand, did she have any reason to help him? "Ah, do I need a reason for my actions?" With a disdainful laugh, Nyx then denied. "Only you and Erebus would count out everything so clearly. Besides, I was just there for fun. A clash of great divine power is after all only the second such instance since the creation." Nodding, although Laine didn't quite believe it, he decided not to pursue the matter further. After all, he had been prepared for the whims of a chaos deity. And just as Nyx said, during the struggle at the end of the First Age, the Titans thought they were the main force, but it was Gaia, the Mother Earth who fought against the sky, who was the main power. But back then, the Lady of the Night didn't have the time to go to the Earth to watch the battle. Perhaps she really did just want to watch the drama unfold. However, thinking it over, Gaia had been the real agent of action in 2 ages and yet had never gained any benefits from it, which was indeed rather unusual. Sometimes, Laine didn't feel much like targeting her. But there was no helping it. However pitiable Gaia was, she was all too easily influenced or acted on whims, and he had to respond accordingly. His choice to come here had to do with checking if Mother Earth had already fallen into a brief slumber. He still needed to pick a suitable candidate related to the branch of the golden apple tree. Alright, then I'll just assume you were here for fun. Even so, to thank you for not standing against me before, I still want to share an interesting discovery with you. Shaking his head gently, Laine spoke about something he had contemplated for a long time. Nyx, did you know? Long ago, I've been thinking about where we fall short compared to complete great divine power. You have to think about that. Don't you know everything? With a light snort, the Lady of the Night said, apart from maintaining the stability of personality, where else could the difference be? The darkness is indeed sufficient, your spirituality, and even the newly born samsura are now enough to support the authority of the great divine power. But if you forcibly ascend, you'll end up like Tartarus, losing the will of personality. How is that any different from death? Laine nodded. Just as Nyx had said, the great divine power is the law itself, and the reason they are not complete is that their will cannot permanently merge with the origin without being assimilated. Yes, we need to allow personality to blend with the law without being affected, but we can't do that now. However, I have thought of a possibility. Perhaps this can compensate for our deficiency in this respect. Looking towards where silver humanity was located, Laine stretched out his hand. Two humanoid phantoms slowly emerged, one wrapped in divinity and the other without anything. Nyx could tell that he was using this to represent deities and mortals. Humans. Is this why you invented witchcraft? She asked offhandedly, as the source of the magic net was crystal clear to the divine powers. Thus the origin of the so-called witchcraft was naturally known without asking. One could say that, but so far, it's still far from achieving my purpose. Gently nodding, Laine continued, authority is a part of us, but perhaps our perspective is too high, so even when we wield it, we don't truly understand every bit of it, and that is where our deficiency lies. From the perspective of a god, we will never truly understand it all. But if we can experience it from another perspective, perhaps we can fill that deficiency. He slowly clenched his 5 fingers, and the 2 phantoms disappeared. Because of the unknown, the law affects personality. But if you understood everything, would that problem still exist? After a brief silence, Nyx thought to deny this statement, yet found some sense in it. She realized that she perhaps did not understand the darkness as well as she thought she did. It's like a person not understanding the structure of their own brain, the flow of their blood. They know how to use it, better than anyone else, but not the internal principles. So what are you going to do? Not become a deity, use that samsura of yours. In the end, Nyx was still not optimistic about it. Not exactly, after all, this is just a conjecture, and in the current world, there is still no way to become divine without relying on any external forces, so naturally, I would not engage in a futile effort. Moreover, the world is rather dangerous now, no matter how I think about it, I wouldn't make such a decision. Shaking his head, Laine wasn't ready to do such a thing. He gazed into the distance, pointed at silver humanity, and said slowly, but that doesn't stop me from making some preparations. I have prepared 2 paths for them. I will select some among them who are excellent but not excellent enough, and grant them the opportunity to become divine. Of course, that's not what I want, I just want them to become a benchmark, to tell those truly potential beings that mortals can become divine. Desire is the origin of all things, the driving force of civilization's progress. Even I do not think my wisdom is omnipotent. Laine spoke calmly, concluding, I will create opportunities for them, then wait for them to inspire me. They become sacred, and I advance further. That's reasonable, isn't it? It sounds like it. Indifferent, yet Nyx nodded anyway. Since you see hope in this, give it a try. Contrary to what Laine expected, Nyx found the process itself might be a little more interesting than whatever advancement it might lead to. She was also curious to see what the 2 paths Laine mentioned were. Certainly, they wouldn't be the current method of directly granting godhood. After all, bearing godhood requires qualifications. For deities with immortal essence, their qualification, even if it cannot bear a powerful godhood, at least allows for becoming an ordinary true god. That's the lowest threshold for an innate god, but it's different for other beings. The excellent, but not excellent enough humans Laine spoke of might not have that ability. But the birth of the new humanity is probably soon. Your influence on fate is growing. Perhaps the next generation of humans will come faster, and go faster too. Behind the veil of constant change, Nyx smiled a little unknowingly. As the tri-phased incarnation holding sway over destiny, she had a somewhat vague understanding of the future. Humanity would be created and destroyed once more, an event that should have occurred a millennium later. but is now being accelerated. She would just wait and see what interesting developments could happen among the future humans. Chapter 153, 8, Drawing Lots. The following day. Atop Mount Olympus, the tense atmosphere of the past 10 years gave way to a cheerful ambience that lingered in all directions. Although the celestial phenomena were still terrifying, under the divine power of the gods, the surroundings of the Mount of the Gods had returned to their former state. Except for the weakened sun that had temporarily lost its controller and no longer moved, everything seemed the same as usual. Standing at the entrance of the great hall, Zeus looked at the goddess who had finally arrived and breathed a sigh of relief. Though he was very confident that she would not refuse, nothing was certain until the dust had settled. After all, there had been little contact between them, and despite not having shown it outright, Zeus always felt that Themis had some opinion of him. If she had not come, and he could not persuade another ancient Titan god to stand with Olympus, many things could have become very troublesome afterward. Welcome to your arrival, the just adjudicator, the respected Princess Themis, my dear aunt. Your presence adds a touch of luster to Mount Olympus. With a jubilant smile on his face, Zeus stepped forward. He opened his arms as if he intended to give the goddess of justice a warm embrace. However, Themis slightly shifted to the side, avoiding the closeness of her nephew. All right, there's no need for such courtesy. I did not come because of you, Zeus. I am simply fulfilling the duties bestowed upon me by my godhood, to deliver just judgment to all spirits. Her expression was cold. From their last encounter in the spirit realm, Zeus hadn't left her with a good impression. Throughout the years, she had seen that he was also quite close to two goddesses. One was Eurinum, whom she had met before, Metis' sister, and the other was a goddess in black rarely seen, seeming to reside upon the stars. However, compared to the former, the latter, owing to her father's neutral stance in the Titanomachy, did maintain some distance from Zeus. Metis, isn't she your wife? As the future king of the gods, you must not do anything to make her sad. Themis had simply been warning Zeus not to be too promiscuous, but as soon as her words fell, she saw the color of Zeus's face suddenly stiffen. She has been feeling unwell lately, my lady. Perhaps she was frightened by the power of the father god before, as her divine power is not that strong, so she did not come to the feast today. Please come this way, my lady. You and my foster mother are the only two ancient Titan gods here today. His tone somewhat stiff, Zeus managed a smile and turned to walk toward the palace. Frowning slightly, Themis hadn't expected such a severe reaction from Zeus. She had only intended to caution him against absurdity. But after all, it was someone else's business, and whatever he wished to do had nothing much to do with her. So Themis said no more and simply shook her head slightly, proceeding towards the palace as well. With the goddess of justice entering the great hall, the deities atop Mount Olympus had mostly arrived. Earlier, under the escort of a goddess, the god of the ocean, still semi-conscious, returned to his divine palace atop the encircling river, where the environment was more conducive to Oceanus's healing. The furious tides of the East Sea brought him waves of pain with each moment, and only when he awakened could he mobilize his divine authority to quell them. Therefore, only the primeval water goddess remained to witness the succession of the new divine king. The sun god Helios, however, had been roused by the rapidly empowered boiling water goddess, Perse, within just one day and was brought directly to Mount Olympus. He now sat in a corner, looking dejected. He had initially not wanted to come. The heavenly father Hyperion was missing, and the heart of the sun was left empty. Helios preferred to sleep within the sun for a while, but as a former loyalist in secret allegiance, he had to make an appearance. Beside the primeval water goddess, Eurinum, Pronoia, Tethys, and several other Oceanides with godly duties took their seats in succession, opposite the children of the primordial sea god on the other side of the divine palace. But on that side, Pontus's eldest son, Nereus, was chatting idly with Poseidon, showing no intention of paying attention to the opposite side. They conversed with great enjoyment, and it was unclear who approached whom first. Compared to yesterday's slightly anxious expression, today's Nereus seemed to have returned to his former self. He appeared genial and polite, his conversation eliciting hearty laughter from Poseidon, who was no more than 10 years removed from the world. This is really interesting, isn't it, little Chiron? This kind of scene is not something you can see just anywhere. Sitting in a corner of the great hall, Hecate casually took a fruit from the table and popped it into her mouth as she spoke. She wasn't referring to the boring feast, but to the diverse array of deities here. Chaos world was always vast and empty, and golden humanity didn't have such complex thoughts. These sights were often seen only when slightly opposing gods gathered together. Next to her, the centaur didn't speak. In fact, he felt he shouldn't be there. Everyone coming and going around him was a deity, and he was the only one who looked peculiar, being a demigod. His large stature made him particularly conspicuous. The passing gods cast strange glances at him, some as if evaluating a rare object, others simply in disgust, which made him feel somewhat uneasy. Don't mind them. They're just stronger than you and look more normal. It's no big deal. If anyone dares not to accept this and comes to me with their nonsense, I'll pin them to the ground and beat them. Anyway, with Golden Mane not intervening, there aren't many who can stand against me. Hecate waved her hand nonchalantly. In her eyes, there really weren't many experts in Olympus now. Apart from the family of Zeus, there was only Thetis, the original goddess of water, who was a bit more formidable. The rest were just ordinary deities making up the numbers, so much so that the goddess of magic with her intermediate divine power had actually become top tier here. And among those who paid attention to the centaurs, clearly none of the above-mentioned deities were present. Chiron fell silent again. The hearing of the gods was not poor, and many could hear Hecate's voice. However, after assessing the opponent's strength, and although they did not understand what the magic web meant and whether it could fight, they still refrained from causing further trouble. However, this was also why many gods of later generations had not appeared, and why some deities had not arrived. If it were thousands of years later, perhaps the irascible war god would have been unable to control his temper. Time ticked away second by second until, at a certain moment, Zeus walked toward the center of the great hall. Ladies and gentlemen, the feast is about to begin, but before that, I have a few long-awaited announcements to make. His voice spread, and with the utterance of the host, the somewhat noisy hall gradually quieted down. Standing in the center, Zeus looked around with a smile, eyeing each deity present. Firstly, after a decade of tough battles, Olympus has achieved the final victory. And the succession of the Divine King will put a perfect end to this. The former Divine King passed on his authority to us, to his 3 offspring, this is unquestionable. And after discussions with my brothers yesterday, in the end, for the sake of our bond, we have entrusted the decision to fate. This was the narrative he had decided on after much deliberation. There was no need for comparisons, no need for a power struggle, as these would only make him appear on the same level as his 2 brothers. Only the choice of fate could reflect his victory amidst a joke. As for whether others would believe it or not, even if no one believed it now, surely someone would in the future. In this respect, it seems that many rulers, both mythological and from later generations, came to the same conclusion. 3 lots, symbolizing the sky, the ocean, and the underworld, we used to decide the division of status. Under the witness of fate, in the end, I received the best lot and thus, with their blessings, became the founder of the new divine court. No sooner had he finished speaking than, as expected, the hall erupted into an uproar, with the gods murmuring among themselves. Determining kingship by drawing lots sounded like an absurd tale. Some believed it, some did not, but regardless, behind the laughable decision on kingship, it hinted that Zeus and his brothers did not become adversaries because of it, and they could still be regarded as one. 3 powerful deities, along with their gentle yet battle-ready sister, indeed barely qualified to prop up the new divine court. Silence. With a soft command to stop the discussions, Zeus's expression turned serious. He looked around, making eye contact with each deity in turn. This is the final outcome. So if no one has objections to this, then today, I, the King of the Thousand Thunders, son of Cronus, noble descendant of the Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, will become the 3rd generation divine king here, ruling over all spirits and things in the world. No deity spoke up to object, and the only one who might have caused an upset, the god of the ocean, was not present. In the silence, Zeus raised his right hand, which held a familiar scepter. Triggered by this divine artifact from the former divine king, an invisible force became apparent. It was related to all 3 deities, but when the other 2 entities relinquished their attraction to it, it floated straight towards Zeus. Without light flickering or the world celebrating, the new divine king was born silently. The era had completed its final change, and the rules of the present world shifted slightly. At the same time, an invisible disturbance also swept across the world. A new shackle was born, but nobody was aware of it yet. What's this? The gods were somewhat confused, as they felt nothing else, just as if the disturbance had never existed. Zeus was different, though, through the newly acquired divine authority of the divine king, he understood everything. This was not anything else but the present world's delayed retribution for the destruction caused by the deities before. From now on, when the gods neared the earth, their divine power would tend toward null. When they approached the deep sea, they would retain only a tenth of their strength. When they were close to the sun and moon or the underworld, their power would also be greatly diminished. In the present world, only atop Mount Olympus would their divine powers be as before. Because this place was the only one in the War of Era transition where, because of a deity's birth rather than damage, it remained undisturbed. Chapter 154, 9 Reward for Merit. Atop Mount Olympus, the banquet paused abruptly due to sudden changes. The deities discussed the alterations in the laws, but soon, these changes were publicly announced by the new divine king. Although the idea of power being limited seemed hard to accept, the gods only briefly debated it before no one had any particularly strong reactions. This was because the weakening of divine power affected all gods equally, even those who had not partaken in the divine war. Just as Mother Earth had been continually weakened before for simply being great in the living world, now all deities were equally suppressed. With everyone limited, it was as if no one was limited. Besides each other, the gods had no real opponents on Earth. Thus, aside from causing less destruction, this restriction seemed to have little effect. Before long, the atmosphere grew lively again, with delightful nectar and exquisite dishes being served at the table, and the banquet was about to officially commence. However, this was not just a celebration banquet, but also one for the allocation of victories and for dealing with the relics of the former court, so before this, the attention of the gods once again converged upon Zeus. Facing the gazes of the gods, in the name of the divine king, he first turned his attention to his own family members. Despite the victory, there were still two enemies to deal with. With the greatest enemy, the divine king, gone, the only powerful ally who could listen to his command was his sister. My sister, Hestia, who commands fire and protection. Although the war has ended, there are some remnants that have yet to be dealt with. I hope you can travel to the west of the continent afterward and assist the Hecatonkers in defeating the resisting Titan god, Atlas. I admire his loyalty and courage, Zeus said slowly, so if he is willing to serve me, I will forgive his crimes and allow him to become a member of Olympus. Okay. She nodded, as this had been discussed the day before, so Hestia asked as prepared, what if he refuses to surrender? The sky in the west is still falling, that place needs a support. If he is unwilling to serve me, let him stand there in his Titan form, bearing the symbol that split from Mount Otherworld, and become the pillar that supports the sky. Looking westward, Zeus finally said, East and west, I will wait for him to bow to me on Mount Olympus. Taking the order, Hestia moved aside. The Olympus pantheon was just established, so as the eldest sister, she had no choice but to go in person. Hades, my brother, before you head to the underworld, please do one thing for me. The son of the heavenly father and mother Earth, Cronus, the ancient god of meteorology, this simple titan once tormented the stars and now has opposed Olympus for 10 years. To punish his crimes, please take him down with Poseidon and imprison him at the bottom of Tartarus, so he can never come out again. As Zeus's voice fell, the gods were initially shocked, as apart from former titans, no true god had ever been locked into the abyss. But after a brief contemplation, they fell silent. Imprisoning Cronus in the abyss might theoretically cause chaos in the current world's meteorology. However, both Zeus and Poseidon had overlapping and conflicting godly duties with him. If duties are similar, they can be replaced. Conflict means there must be a primary and secondary, difficult to coexist. Besides, the newly born divine court indeed needed to establish its reputation by using an ancient god, and Cronus was more than suitable. Of course, I will take care of this trouble. Hades nodded in agreement, and Poseidon, too, was quite happy to deal with the conflicting Titan god. However, before that, the future Sea Emperor continued to focus on Zeus, seemingly reminding him not to forget their agreement. So glancing at his once-second brother, although somewhat reluctant, Zeus still sent him aid. This had also been agreed upon beforehand. After all, on the high seas, Poseidon had yet to establish a foothold. Eurybia, daughter of Pontus and the embodiment of the sea's might, your previous act of rebellion in the face of the enemy is despicable. However, my brother has pleaded on your behalf, and your own brothers have always fought for me. As Zeus gazed at the three children of Pontus, he made his decision. If you are willing to go and assist Poseidon, then I, in my capacity as divine king, will pardon your actions and grant you the same rights as other deities. I accept your judgment. Below, Eurybia breathed a sigh of relief, as did her elder brother Nereus. This was the best outcome they could have hoped for. Now, they knew why Pontus chose a life of seclusion. Without his strong backing on the high seas, they could no longer contest the god of the ocean. Thus, changing allegiances was the best option. Aside, the former water goddess Thetis wanted to say something, but considering her husband who had been severely injured and would not recover for a century, she ultimately remained seated. She planned to wait and see what Zeus would do next, as well as await her husband's recovery. This allowed Zeus, who was watching secretly, to breathe a sigh of relief. He certainly did not want to fall out with his nominal foster parents just as he was taking the throne. Zephyrus, god of west wind. With the most troublesome part resolved, Zeus became composed. He looked toward the far end of the great hall, where the four wind gods stood. They were originally loyal to the divine king, but their loyalty was not steadfast, and so, following Eurybia's lead, they had defected to Olympus. Unlike the female sea goddess, however, the wind gods had not rebelled, and the leader among them even earned extra merit, a fact that pleased Zeus and led to their welcoming. You wisely chose victory before the battle began, so I forgive your past. And you, Zephyrus, even reclaimed my sister's birthright divine artifact, the wheat gold scepter, from the former divine king with your wisdom. Somewhat satisfied, Zeus felt that his new divine court needed gods who were not particularly powerful but had no lack of capabilities. I mercifully retain your position as the leader of the wind gods and additionally grant you the opportunity to contribute more to the world's climate after the god of meteorology was cast into the abyss. Of course, beyond this, you must also serve as my messenger to gather news from the mortal world. Since the power of the gods was restricted, they could no longer easily see through all the mysteries of the mortal realm. Therefore, Zeus also needed a deity to do this for him, even now when he had little concern for it. Thank you for your mercy, your majesty, I will do my utmost. Bowing slightly, the god of west wind felt a renewed sense of his own shrewd and resolute nature. Upon realizing that the former divine king was in a disadvantageous position, he expressed his loyalty to Zeus in secret. Regarding the wheat gold scepter, when Demeter was rescued from Cronus's belly, the power of this companion divine artifact changed day by day, ultimately falling silent like a dead object. To exchange a useless thing for a chance at advancement, Zephyrus felt the trade was quite worthwhile. Apart from feeling terror when the former divine king went on a killing spree, the god of west wind felt his path had always been smooth sailing. Monitoring powerful deities and making choices at critical moments, each time was fraught with danger yet without mishap, as if fate itself were on his side. Thank you, fate, for your favor. With silent gratitude in his heart, Zephyrus was already looking forward to contributing to the current world's climate after his grandfather Creus was cast into Tartarus. Chapter 155, 10 Sacred Stone. Very well. In the center of the great hall, Zeus nodded. He did not know the thoughts of the god of west wind, but he felt that his current expression was truly one of heartfelt gratitude. However, there were still many matters to attend to, so Zeus suppressed the desire to engage in further conversation and signaled for him to step down, then turned to his foster mother. He was well aware of what he had done, so he had to find another way to appease his powerful foster parents. And after fulfilling his promise to Poseidon, this seemed all the more straightforward. After all, the ocean was not something that could be lost twice. It would be up to them to decide who would ultimately gain it. Noble ancient Titan god, emblem of the primeval waters, mother of the sea, you stood by my side in the most perilous times. Though my mother goddess did not come, I still thank you on her behalf for your assistance, he said. Though in his heart the status of the deities of the ocean was not yet as great as that of a once-dead goat, Zeus still expressed his utmost gratitude. Therefore, to repay your kindness, I, as divine king, promise that in the future, I will never, like my father before me, take up arms against the sea, he declared. What? Thetis was somewhat surprised, and the gods were all astir. They were unaware that Zeus had already sworn an oath to the Styx River to persuade Poseidon. In their eyes, the so-called Sea Emperor and Hades were just semantics, like Cronus had once tacitly allowed his brothers to rule their own domains. But now, Zeus, in his capacity as divine king, was making a promise that truly amazed them. Yes, as divine king, my word is my bond, Zeus affirmed. Nodding, he seized the opportunity to look towards the goddess of justice standing beside him. My aunt, the revered lawgiver, overseer of fairness and justice, I also invite you in the name of the divine king, he continued. I hope you will delineate order for the new divine court and make impartial judgments when conflicts arise among the gods. Zeus would naturally resolve any contradictions that the divine king could settle. But when truly vexing issues arose, the presence of the goddess of law was equally necessary. Besides, Zeus had two other reasons in mind. Setting a new order for the divine court, although not quite the same as legislation, was beneficial to his authority and emulation of his heavenly father's past actions. And even if Themis did not truly heed his commands, her presence alone was sufficient to enhance the majesty of the divine court. Though she had never truly acted, Zeus could sense that this goddess, who had seen an immense increase in her origin after legislation, possessed a power far from trivial, nearly at the pinnacle of divine might. I can agree to this, but on the condition that you do not interfere with my reasonable determination of laws, Themis said. Nodding in agreement, Themis remembered the scene she saw during her last visit to the spirit realm and her casual conversation with Laine. Establishing standards for human morality indeed required the assistance of the divine court, and of course, she also wanted to take this opportunity to offer advice to her nephew. However, this would also need the help of the Queen of Gods. This was why Themis had previously taken notice of Metis, as most deities saw this goddess of wisdom unquestionably as the future third-generation Queen of Gods. No problem, I trust your justice, Zeus said. Unaware that the first thing the goddess wanted to enact was the order of marriage, Zeus's smile broadened even more. The affirmation of the goddess of law further bolstered the credibility of the new divine court, and Zeus's gaze swept over the deities, finally resting in a corner of the temple. Ah, and you, my friend, master of the magic net, Hecate, he said. Looking towards the red-haired goddess sitting in the distance, Zeus thought of yesterday's astrological outcome. 2 children, a god and a goddess, one born later, one born sooner. Just as Mother Earth's birth preceded the Heavenly Father, so the girl who was born first would surpass her mother, the boy who came later would surpass his father. They would be revered by all creatures and demonstrate their might between the earth and the sky. Upon hearing such a result, what choice Zeus would make was beyond doubt. Although the prophecy did not reveal that a god surpassing him would replace him as the divine king, this was exactly what Zeus wanted. His reason for having Hecate divine the future of his progeny rather than his own was to avoid any outcomes related to the divine king. I once promised you the moon, my friend, and now I fulfill it in the name of the divine king. As an additional reward, I also promise you rights independent of the sky, earth, and ocean, for I know you have always disliked being bound, and this is the recompense you deserve. Alright, I understand. Waving her hand dismissively, Hecate showed some restraint on this formal occasion. The so-called promise of Zeus held no significance for her. Even though divine power was restricted on Earth, she had little divine power before weaving the magic net. So, with or without this supposed promise, she didn't feel any god could limit her actions. However, after yesterday's astrology, Hecate was now somewhat curious about how Zeus would treat his children in the future. After their birth, would he consume them like Cronus? Indifferent to Hecate's aloofness, Zeus immediately went on to make arrangements for many deities, some he had favored, and some who had proven their merit. Due to the previous changes in heaven and earth, most of the water bodies and mountains on earth were no longer the same as before, and several inland lakes had formed, which were also within his purview to assign. Finally, Zeus looked around and took out a stone. The gaze of all the gods was drawn to it. This was a special stone, it exuded an aura similar to that of the new divine king. Apart from this, the force of life was covertly lurking within, flowing like blood. A sacred, noble rock, and also the most critical contributor to our cause. It once endured the smelting of the great sun, the strikes of thunder, and received Mother Earth's blessing. In the end, it took my place and was swallowed by the former divine king. Its contributions are beyond doubt, and I am grateful for its kindness, thankful for everything it has done for me. This part of history was actually little known. Many deities were unclear about how Zeus had managed to escape when Cronus was still in power. But now, with the narration from Zeus himself, they could not help but admire the reclusive former queen of gods. To come up with such a method to deceive the divine king and have the courage to implement it, she was indeed extraordinary. I will place it at Delphi, the sacred place of Mother Earth in the mortal realm. It contains the power of the golden apple and rightly deserves to be preserved there. Standing before the deities, Zeus slowly spoke. His reason for bringing up this matter at this particular time was not truly to commemorate some stone, for Delphi didn't even have any occupants at the moment. For whom would he place it there? He was merely using the recounting of the past as a way to hint that Mother Earth not only had blocked the former divine king for him but had also assisted him on his path to escape. Of course, at this moment, Zeus was unaware that Gaia had fallen into a brief slumber. He simply wished to eliminate as much as possible the influence of this active ancient god on current affairs. Beyond that, before his journey to the oracle, he intended to remove the statues of the second-generation divine king and the old gods from that temple, replacing them with his and the new gods of Olympus. He did not know what significance this held, but it did not prevent him from trying. However, Your Majesty, as I understand it, the Oracle of Delphi simultaneously honors 3 deities. At that moment, a deity who had just been rewarded suddenly spoke up. The whereabouts of the former divine king are unknown, and Mother Earth would probably be willing to accept the offering of your sacred artifact, but the creator of the spirit realm might not feel the same. Placing your sacred stone at Delphi, is it something that should be reconsidered? I know, nodded Zeus, already having planned for this. That's why I intend to go there myself. Some of you might have already felt the world that suddenly connected with the mortal realm. Perhaps some have explored it, perhaps not, but I have been there. On this trip to the Oracle of Delphi, I also plan to meet this ancient god and understand matters related to his domain. Chapter 156, Chapter 11 Materials. Everything was well arranged, and the gods felt satisfied, so the banquet officially began. The feast lasted only 3 days, not because the gods' sense of time suddenly returned, but because many matters urgently needed resolution. After 3 days, several deities were to set out to address the issues with Atlas and the god of meteorology. After all, the sky was still descending, and the post-war world also required sorting and pacifying. But unlike the past, as the gods began to celebrate, Zeus, despite having become the master of the new divine court, did not linger at the feast. Instead, he returned alone to the mountaintop, staring blankly at the empty sleeping quarters. My decision was not wrong, this is the best outcome. Murmuring softly, Zeus waved his hand, sealing off the uninhabited divine palace. Unless necessary, he would not come here again. This is the end. Turning around, the new divine king stepped forward a few paces at the peak of Mount Olympus, overlooking the surrounding lands. Although smaller than the former Mount Otherworld that once propped up the sky of the east, this Mount of the Gods was only slightly less imposing. Gazing into the distance, the nearby white clouds were clearly stratified, and beyond the heavy, dark clouds and the continuous rain, the divine king could see valleys and basins scattered everywhere, silently bearing witness to the recent devastation. No wonder the world imposed restrictions on the gods. After all, the farther from Olympus, the more severe the disasters caused by the gods were. At this moment, however, Zeus was not worried about these things. He was only thinking about the question he had pondered while facing Cronus. Legislation, stellar realm, creation of life. Over the past 10,000 years, the previous divine king had completed these great feats. Among these 3, it was likely that one was the reason for his father god's strength. Originally, Zeus wasn't in a hurry to attempt these tasks, but now he could no longer wait. The suddenly opened spirit realm, the Mother Earth who left after dropping a cryptic comment and has yet to inquire about him, and the Titans who have been indifferent towards him, all this made him feel very insecure. He urgently needed greater strength. If the position of divine king could not grant it to him just yet, he would strive in other directions. The stellar realm. Helios. Remembering the god of sun who had been brought to Olympus but lay half dead, Zeus found himself in a dilemma. He didn't quite trust this fellow who had defected in secret, but he had no one else to call upon. Having the sun chariot might mean that the sun's movements didn't necessarily require the god of sun, but the task would still require a deity with a similar role. Goddesses like Phoebe, the goddess of luminous, and Thea, the mother of light could do it. But Zeus didn't even need to think about it. These 2 goddesses would never come to drive the chariot for him. His elder sister Hestia could also manage the task barely. As she mentioned, the divine artifacts seemed to have been endowed with a portion of the power of fire by its maker. But by the same token, the divine king could not possibly ask his sister to drive the chariot for him. With a slight change of expression, the new divine king smiled. Turning to look back, he had partly left the banquet in anticipation of someone's arrival. You have finally come. There, a deity whose appearance was not robust, but whose gaze was exceptionally bright, was slowly approaching him. The son of Epitus, the forethinker, the wise one. I did not mention you at the previous victory celebration. Please do not blame me. for there is an important task waiting for you to complete. Once you finish it, I will surely grant you the position and honor you deserve. It doesn't matter, Your Majesty, I don't care about those things. With a slight bow, Prometheus wore a smile. What would you ask of me today? Although not powerful himself, he did not show the reverential deference to the divine king that other lesser deities did. It was hard to say whether this was self-confidence or something else, as those who pride themselves on wisdom were always so. Ha, that's right. I've heard that the reason life is so abundant on the earth today is because the gods have created life twice. With a hearty laugh, Zeus didn't care about the minor matter and spoke of the history of the past. The first time, the gods gathered together, and life of the golden generation was thus born. The second time, only your father, the Titan Erebus, and Mother Earth took part. Is that correct? You are correct, said Prometheus with a slight nod, expressing his regret. 10,000 years ago, the previous divine king commanded the gods to create the golden humanity, making Delphi the origin of material life. Later, Mother Earth ordered my brothers and me to assist our father in creating the silver humanity. Unfortunately, among all creatures, humans, my favorite, have already passed away. Their souls either ascended to the heavens or returned to the spirit realm. And another generation has varied due to Mother Earth's mood at the time. Even today, including Prometheus, who witnessed the birth of humanity firsthand, the gods still believe the distinctiveness of silver humanity originated from Gaia's fury during their creation. However, in reality, although the process was flawed, the result was serendipitously correct. After all, it was her anger that ultimately led Gaia to decide to mix darkness with life, giving birth to the inherently evil second generation of humans. That truly is regrettable. Humans, it is said that it was Cronus, the previous divine king, who first proposed the idea of creating a quasi-god race by combining the powers of all deities. Reflective, Zeus continued to inquire, so Prometheus, in your opinion, what is the difference between humans and other forms of life? Wisdom, Your Majesty, they are rare beings that possess thought processes similar to those of the deity race. Without any hesitation, Prometheus answered from the heart. I must say, creating humans may be one of the real contributions that the previous divine king made to the world. Without him, I might not have thought to create such a unique form of life. It's just that he set too many limitations for humanity, so much so that mortals can learn, but not create. I even believe that if they were not subjected to innate influences, they would be even more like the deity race, and might even develop more remarkable achievements that would capture our attention. Similar. Nodding, Zeus seemed to be pondering something. He had learned enough. Looking at the god before him, the divine king finally voiced his request. You must have guessed my purpose by now, Prometheus, son of the Titan Erebus, the forethinker. A new era has arrived, and the earth similarly needs quasi-god beings to embellish it. I want to know if you have inherited your father's ability and also possess the power to create life. Stirred, and despite having formed a guess about the divine king's purpose from their previous conversation, Prometheus was still pleasantly surprised. He had been fond of golden humanity before and often lived among them. He also felt compassion for silver humanity and had taught them knowledge. If he could personally oversee the creation of the third generation of humans, that would be ideal. He would create truly perfect humans according to his own vision. Of course, Your Majesty. I have assisted my father God in creation and have observed the Mother Earth creating humans. I possess such ability, and I also have a brother who participated in those events and can help me. However, he hesitated for a moment, and although the forethinker was eager to create humans, he didn't want his creations to be short-lived, vanishing like the past 2 generations, so he tentatively said, "But all mortals must one day die, Your Majesty. Perhaps, in addition to men, I should create women too. This way, they could procreate on their own, without deities having to create them over and over again. At Delphi, my father God once dripped the symbolic force of human procreation onto this stone, and I've brought it back with me. If you wish." Not so fast. What stone are you referring to? Interrupting Prometheus, Zeus was genuinely surprised. A stone symbolizing human reproduction. Indeed, there were many things from the past that he was not aware of. Right here. With divine power surging, unlike the one designated by Zeus as a sacred stone, the stone that Prometheus produced was as tall as he was. This stone had once rested at the feet of the god of speech, and then, due to an accidental encounter with well water, it acquired extraordinary powers. Now, it was placed once again on the Mount of the Gods. Life. It somewhat reminds me of the golden apple, yet it's entirely different. Looking at the stone that Prometheus placed before him, Zeus sensed that special force. With it, humans could reproduce, but he did not want to do that just yet. Zeus supported the creation of humans not for the sake of humans themselves, he merely wanted to repeat what his father god had done before. Since it was just an experiment, naturally, there was no need for extra measures. Let's wait for now. Actually, I too thought about this initially. But Prometheus, the proliferation of humans is not urgent, we have ample time to consider the pros and cons. Casually storing the stone away and remembering the existing silver humanity on Earth, those inherently sinful remnants from the previous generation, Zeus said with a smile. My dear friend, creating humans is not a simple matter. I'll give you 100 years to prepare. As for the materials, I have thought of some suitable items, and I will soon have the materials delivered to you. Chapter 157, Chapter 12 Disappearance. The preparation for creating humans was destined to take a long time, so Zeus set the matter aside for a while. He had planned to destroy the remnants of the previous humans. Now, putting them to good use seemed like a fine turn of events. However, compared to the past, the lifespan of the new humans would be greatly reduced. After all, they wouldn't receive the baptism of life itself like the previous 2 generations of humans did, but were made with second-hand materials. This is also good. If what Prometheus said is true, and the humans whose thoughts have not been altered aren't anything special, then they can soon die, and I can then try again, imitating the golden and silver humanity. It's only a few hundred years, I can wait that long, he said. After some thought, Zeus returned to the banquet at the divine palace. He still had high hopes for the creation of mankind. After all, before Cronus, the cosmos had an owner. The previous god of sun hadn't even touched the pinnacle of formidable divine power. The same was true for presiding over legislation, which was largely the work of Timus, with the previous divine king playing a limited role, but creating humans was different. This was first proposed by Cronus, and it was 2 deities who truly carried it out. The master of the spirit realm, the embodiment of Mother Earth. Perhaps there was really something special about humans for these 3 supreme beings to have taken such an interest, one after the other. 3 days later, within the palace on Mount Olympus, Zeus said farewell to the gods one by one, watched as his 2 brothers and sister left, and Mount of the gods started to feel somewhat empty. Iris, my messenger, go and destroy the remaining silver humanity on the earth. Let them return to what they were before they were created, and then bring them to me, he commanded. The one Zeus ordered this of was the goddess of the rainbow, Iris, the daughter of Pontus and the sea spectacles, Thomas. In the disputes of the past decade, she often conveyed messages between the gods, possessing a speed that ordinary deities could hardly match. Tasking her with dealing with humans was more than appropriate. As for whether she could accomplish it, there was no question. Even gods stripped of divine power possess strength unimaginable to mortals. After all, a godly form is inherently transcendent, far beyond what any mortal thing can match. At your command, your majesty. Answering in a soft voice, the infamous reputation of the silver humanity had already spread amongst the gods, so the goddess of the rainbow, Iris, was not surprised that they were to face destruction. Thus, after a single response, she transformed into a rainbow light and flew into the distance. It's time for me to depart as well. Without taking any gods with him, Zeus left Olympus alone. No matter the result he obtained in Delphi, he preferred to be the sole knower of it, without the presence of others. Soaring through the sky riding on thunder, looking down upon the living beings on the earth, Zeus distinctly felt that the further he was from Mount Olympus, the slower the divine power within his body became. Eventually, when it slowed down enough to be maintained no longer, but as soon as he attempted to get closer to the earth, that sluggishness would intensify again. Is this the shackle prepared for deities by the mortal world? I can still influence the world's climate with authority, but they will be purely natural thunder and rain, not lightning capable of harming a deity. Making a slight judgment, Zeus found that the world's limitation on divine power was not as absolute as he had thought. He could still forcibly exert a very small part of his divine power, shaking mountains as in the past, but then he would face retaliation from the law in an instant. There's no need, he said, shaking his head slightly. Zeus didn't think he needed to violate the law, forcibly exerting power on the earth. Flying mid-air, after a long while, the space in front of the divine king opened up. On the earth below, many buildings from the last era rose up here and there, creations of the golden age humanity. Despite thousands of years, they still stood firm. Here we are. Among the many structures, Zeus immediately recognized the most distinctive one. The Oracle of Delphi, a divine creation at the foot of Mount Parnassus, was the world's first temple, built at the behest of the ancient gods. Time had not left a single mark on it, the stone surface was as smooth as new. Even though he felt no actual power, the ancient temple still gave Zeus a vaguely oppressive sensation. It was the presence enshrined within the temple that created this feeling. Let's not mention the previous divine king for now, the other two deities had both left a trace of their power here, becoming eternal statues. Although it was only a trace, when the spirit realm opened to the mortal world, and Mother Earth merged with her true self, these two powers underwent a transformation as well. Has no one come to acknowledge my presence? Slightly disheartened, even having come here, yet still not greeted by anyone, Zeus couldn't believe that Mother Earth was unaware of his arrival. Just as any deity nearing Olympus would be sensed by him, his own conspicuous arrival at Delphi could not possibly go unnoticed by Mother Earth. If she was aware but gave no response, that could only mean she was showing an unwelcoming attitude. However, since he had come, it was impossible to just turn back. Zeus landed directly on the ground. As he neared the earth, the shackles of law tightened further, and he felt somewhat uneasy with this sensation of suppressed divine power. Once this business was finished, the divine king decided to seldom walk the mortal world. Let's go inside and have a look. Approaching the grand temple gateway, stepping on the blue stone slabs in front of the oracle, Zeus passed by 12 tall stone pillars. The stone pillars were covered in different human figures, landscapes, and skills, some as original as they were, others appearing spontaneously over the subsequent millennia. They depicted how the gods created the beings of the Golden Age, recorded the birth of the first humans, the human king's dreams of the gods, and that half-heard poem. In the end, everything halted at the collapse of Mount Otherworld, seemingly symbolizing the demise of the golden humanity. Poems. For some reason, looking at the images etched upon the pillars, Zeus was reminded of the inexplicable intuition he had when leaving the abyss. Once again, he felt as if he had lost something. Somewhat irritated, he attributed this to the unease brought about by his limited divine power. Zeus entered the temple with his head held high and strode toward its heart. Along the way were many intersecting passages leading to various side halls, each with statues of different deities. But he was not distracted and kept moving inward. Finally, in the center of the oracle, Zeus saw 3 stone platforms floating in midair. One was slightly lower, in the middle, symbolizing the divine king's dominion over the world and the right to grant existence to all things. The 2 higher ones, on either side, symbolized the ancient gods' transcendent nature, granting flesh and soul to all things. However, at this moment before Zeus, only the platforms on the sides held statues, one represented by a vessel of unique shape, the other a constantly changing symbol. But in the center, the divine king's platform was empty, with nothing on it. Who's there? Suddenly, Zeus sharply turned around. Perhaps due to his suppressed divine power, his senses had also dulled considerably, and it was not until the newcomer entered the temple that he finally became aware of her presence. However, the newcomer had not sought to conceal herself, she was a sultry woman. But Zeus could tell at a glance that she was a nymph born from the woods. "I am Monda, your majesty." Bowing slightly from afar, the nymph respectfully said. "Before Mother Earth fell into slumber, she commanded me and my sisters to guard this place and informed me that the world would welcome a new ruler. It is indeed my fault for not greeting you in advance." Chapter 158, Chapter 13 Ancient Serpent. Asleep. Zeus seized the key point from the other's words without concern for anything else. "Are you saying that the respected Mother Earth has now returned to her essence and no longer bothers with the troubles of the present world?" "Yes." Monda bowed gently and replied respectfully, "But this is only a temporary slumber. Perhaps a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 years, your highness will awaken from her slumber." She didn't specify an exact timeline, but during this period, she has commanded me and a few sisters to guard the matters around Delphi. "I see. It seems that I won't have the chance to meet Mother Earth on this trip." His expression softened, and understanding the circumstances, Zeus was clear why his arrival was unheeded. Although he was somewhat disappointed that his grandmother had not chosen to withdraw from the world like the mountain god and sea god, a few hundred years was still good. A few hundred years was enough time for him to accomplish many things. "You are Monda, aren't you? I've heard of you, you once delivered a golden apple to the mother goddess." Regaining his composure, The divine king nodded to the nymph and then continued to inquire. Since you're in charge of the oracle, what about the statue of the previous divine king? It disappeared a few days ago. After hesitating for a moment under the divine king's piercing gaze, the nymph still revealed the truth. Disappeared. Somewhat uncertain, a few days ago was undoubtedly the day the War of the Gods took place. However, the exact truth wasn't that important. Perhaps it was erased by Cronus himself or destroyed along with his demise. Regardless of the reason, Zeus was quite satisfied with this outcome. After the previous events, if it had been up to him to remove the statue of the former divine king, he would have been somewhat reluctant to do so. I understand. If that's the case, you may leave now, you're no longer needed here. If Mother Earth awakens in the future, remember to convey my regards to her. With a wave of his hand, Zeus no longer paid attention to a minor nymph. After she left the temple, he stepped forward and took out the stone he had sealed as the sacred stone. I mean no offense by coming here, but as the new divine king, the sovereign of the earth and the sky, I rightfully should have a place here. Placing the sacred stone on the pedestal that belonged to the second-generation divine king, Zeus held his breath and gazed intently, trying to sense the surroundings, especially the other world that overlapped with the present one. At first, nothing changed. However, after the sacred stone pulsed with the rhythm of life 7 times, the boundary created by the primordial gods finally responded. As expected. Silently, in Zeus's perception, an invisible portal opened up. Although no being came to greet him, the divine king had anticipated this outcome. After all, the demeanor of the ancient god had not seemed friendly before. Behind the invisible portal, the essence known as spirituality seeped out 1,000-fold, clarifying the divine king's mind. Yet for some reason, besides that, he also felt a familiar yet strange burning sensation. This sensation. Is it Helios? He shook his head slightly, not sure, as the sensation was somewhat different from the sun god. Puzzled, he stepped through the portal and silently disappeared within the Oracle of Delphi. When the divine king left, silence once again fell over the Oracle of Delphi. What no one noticed, though, was that as Zeus crossed the portal, wisps of black and white mist drifted out from behind it and settled to the ground. They gradually gathered together to form a long snake, holding a twig in its mouth, which slithered on the ground upon landing. It seemed slow, but as if it had no physical form, nothing could hinder it. When the snake passed through the temple wall and left, the first thing it saw was the recently departed Monda. Divine King. Is this what a true god is? Standing on a patch of greenery and having been ignored after answering the question, the nymph Monda stared blankly in the direction of the temple. This was not her first time experiencing the difference between the divine and the non-divine. In fact, this was her second time communicating with a true god other than Mother Earth herself. Once upon a time, she had stood by Gaia's side, witness to her union with the primordial sea god Pontus, which yielded a profusion of offspring. Yet, until their separation, neither Pontus nor any of his 5 children had ever spared her a single glance. In the past, when she attended the banquets of the gods as an emissary of Mother Earth, Monda had felt the sensation of being noticed by deities for the first time, albeit briefly and only because of the master she represented. Just a moment ago, when the divine king mentioned, "You once delivered a golden apple to the mother goddess," she thought she might be receiving some commendation. However, the outcome was that Zeus, preoccupied with important matters, never intended to say another word to the beautiful elf. After all, she was merely a nymph, not a true deity. It's time to go back. I suppose the divine king did not wish to see me when he came out. Gently shaking her head, whether the outcome was good or bad, since the new divine king had come here alone, presumably not wishing others to know his whereabouts, Monda also decided not to linger. True gods, truly enviable, aren't they? Yes. She responded offhandedly and walked towards the old abode of Mother Earth. Yet, as she took her first step, she suddenly froze. This wasn't another nymph speaking to her, there shouldn't be anyone else here. The divine king had just passed by, and the one who appeared was a strange voice she had never heard before. SSS. As the hissing sound arose, Monda dared not move hastily. She could feel something crawling past her immobilized feet. It was a snake, and though nymphs had seen similar creatures before, none possessed the wisdom that this one did. In front of her, the snake turned its head, a branch in its mouth, facing the elf behind it. It seems you think so too. If we can reach a consensus, that would be perfect. Smart, desirous, and allowed by Mother Earth to enter her garden. Such a being couldn't be more suitable. Who are you? Her voice trembled slightly, but Monda still tried to think calmly. She did not know which deity was behind this being that dared to conceal itself in the divine king's presence, in the sacred sanctuary of Mother Earth in the mortal realm, harboring ill intentions. SSS. Who I am is not important. What is important is who you are. The snake did not answer the elf's question. Instead, its body gradually coiled. Its neck lifted high, its head level with hers, and its tiny eyes gazed directly at the being before it. An elf, a servant overlooked by the gods, a nymph who desires the nobility of a true god, is that right? What does that have to do with you? A bit out of character, Monda clenched her fists tightly. It wasn't because the other had seen through her thoughts. Even mortals yearn for eternity, and there's nothing remarkable about it. Even if the gods heard it, they would simply laugh it off as a mortal's folly. In fact, she was just vaguely aware of something. And sure enough, although the snake's face showed no expression, Monda felt as though it had just smiled. Of course it has to do with me, Erica's offspring. After all, I can make it happen for you. Answer my question seriously. Do you want to be a god? Do you want immortality? Do you wish to be revered as a king by all your peers? Her heart pounded. Monda remained silent. Today's events had exceeded her comprehension. She did not know who would dare to voice such seductive words so boldly in the sanctuary of Mother Earth. So, what are you suggesting? What I mean is that you can choose to forsake your old master, to go against her will and eat the forbidden fruit, but from then on, you will gain freedom and a new life. Isn't it worth it? This is exactly what you've always wanted. Her lips felt dry as she thought about the divine king who had just disappeared into the temple. The elf incarnate of the oak seemingly realized who she was facing, but this only intensified the struggle within her heart. The other had the power to do this. So now, it was her turn to make a decision. Chapter 159, Chapter 14 Memory. Unaware of what was happening behind him, the black and white mist silently swept past him. Zeus took a step forward, crossing through the invisible portal and entering the spirit realm once again. Through the vagueness, he felt as if he had passed through 3 barriers, 2 of which were the ones he had unintentionally broken the last time. Finally, as the chaotic play of light and shadow returned to normal, he found himself standing on ground that seemed paved with green stone. Looking around, he found himself in an unobstructed clearing. In the distance, a vast cluster of buildings of diverse forms stretched endlessly. At their center, an ancient well, magnified countless times, was placed there. Zeus did not feel any sense of danger, but there was an almost unbearable pressure weighing on his heart. It was like facing his father in the past, unrelated to the strength of power but to an insurmountable divide between him and the other, making him reluctant to entertain thoughts of resistance. That is the well of reincarnation, what I was busily constructing when you barged into the spirit realm a few days ago. At the end of the second epic, I surely did not spare any effort on it. A calm and casual voice came through, instantly breaking the strong presence of the ancient well in the distance. Zeus turned around and there, a deity who appeared very young sat on a chunk of green stone. His features were not quite clear, or rather, they were difficult to remember. By his side stood a goddess with lustrous black hair, enveloped in a halo of light purple light. That was the goddess of the nether moon, whom the divine king recognized at a glance. Although she rarely walked in the mortal world, there were still some records of her. Pardon my intrusion, Lord of the Spirit Realm. I apologize for my previous uninvited entry into your domain. Though he offered an apology, Zeus did not place himself in a subordinate position. There might be a gap in power, but the status of the divine king was granted by the world. At the very least, he would maintain an attitude of equal exchange. It is of no consequence, just a trivial matter after all, and you have already learned your lesson. Speaking of which, that young one who inherited a part of the memory of golden humanity surely has a bias against deities, seeing as we viewed them as mere dust when creating them. The tone was indifferent, and unlike the previous generation. If viewed from the divine king's perspective, Laine didn't really have much to say to him. The powers that could be shared in the world were mostly claimed, and he no longer spent most of the time, like in the previous epic, asleep at the core of the world, helping the spirit realm assimilate source power. The current divine king was of no value to him, and if the deity before him wasn't Zeus, Laine would not even consider meeting him. Perhaps this attitude had been typical of the twin gods of the Dark Knight in their original trajectory. Laine, however, could infer from later records that Zeus could turn things around with faith. As for the specifics of the power, it was hard to say. Excluding the flattery and deification by successors, there had been 2 conflicts between Zeus and Nyx, but they had never really come to blows, so no one knew who had the upper hand. Golden humanity. No wonder he is so opposed to deities. I thought it was your will. Maybe it was Laine's seemingly congenial attitude that made Zeus relax a bit more. Now that the spirit realm encompasses the entire world, all the gods can sense its presence. I wonder if there are many lives like that recent one within the spirit realm. Quite a few, considering how many years have passed. Some of them are hostile towards deities, but most don't care much either way. Seemingly not catching the implied meaning in Zeus's words, Laine spoke indifferently. Of course, I do not particularly care what they think, just as I do not care what they might do. As long as they follow the rules I've set, the spirit realm will not deny any visitor. You can come and go as you please, and if you wish to kill those who come here with malice, that is fine too. Whatever you encounter here is your own affair. That could not be better. The divine king nodded. Having understood the lord of the spirit realm's stance towards the current deities, his visit was effectively complete. However, for Zeus, who had been born just a century ago, there were still many questions he wished to understand. Speaking of which, not long ago, due to my father's doing, the sun suffered a great blow, and the whereabouts of the ancient god of sun are unknown. I've heard that this titan god once had a conflict with the spirit realm. Lifting his gaze slightly, Laine saw the other's intentions. What he really cared about wasn't the sun but the actual whereabouts of the former divine king who had mysteriously vanished. But Laine did not intend to reveal the upheaval in the abyss. Since the other had openly asked about the sun, he would respond with the sun. There was such an incident. Standing up, Laine revealed a smile that left Zeus somewhat puzzled. Since you're so interested, come with me, he said. After all, you are at least a divine king. Since you're here, I'll give you a gift. Walking on a cobblestoned path, the 3 of them moved forward slowly. In the mythologies of later generations in the East, Samsara is an important place and hub for all spirits, but in the world of chaos, it wasn't the case. The world instinctively knew this was a good thing, but like the magic net, for something that didn't originally exist in fate, it actually didn't provide any extra favor. Even because it was a divine artifact without a corresponding deity, no one knew of the existence of samsara in the world. Laine didn't care whether people knew or not. He twisted the light and time of the all-spirit realm, stretching a day into a week. Now, the place had begun to function on a basic level. So, as they approached the well of reincarnation, what Zeus saw were countless souls with lifeless eyes, moving slowly like puppets, leaping into the huge stone well at the edge of their sight. Watching these stiff movements of the souls, an indescribable feeling rose in the heart of the divine king. Intuition told him that he would never become like this, but it didn't prevent the strange atmosphere from affecting him. What's going on here? They seem a bit lively, he asked, trying to make his voice sound normal. Because they have already passed several checkpoints, in fact, this is already the core of reincarnation, Laine said without responding. Instead, it was Liana who spoke. In the outer perimeter, apart from those with strong wills, lingering in the surface of the spirit realm, the souls that are drawn to reincarnation by the all-spirit realm are first cleansed of their memories by one of the 3 caretakers of the all-spirit realm, the goddess of autumn and end, Erebus. Although the well of reincarnation can also do this, in that way the memories would be ground down into the most primal energy by the power of reincarnation and integrated into the spirit realm itself. Clearly, the memories of the living beings themselves are more valuable than some energy. Erase memories. Zeus felt a sudden realization. In the past, people only knew that after death souls would return to the spirit realm, but apart from those in heaven who served as heroic spirits, few deities knew the fates of other souls. Most believed that souls would continue to exist in the spirit realm until they were completely exhausted and returned to nothingness. But today, Zeus felt he had discovered a great secret. It turned out that after death, living beings had their memories stripped away and were thrown into this divine artifact known as the Well of Reincarnation. In the straightforward cultural values of chaos, memory is a noble and mystical thing. This is also reflected in the mythologies of later generations and even sparked much exploration among the wise. To them, stripping away memories was an unimaginable punishment. So, did they commit some kind of mistake? He asked, despite only being curious about mere beings. Zeus didn't care about the fates of ordinary spirits, he just wanted to know if the Lord of the Spirit Realm took pleasure in tormenting living beings. No, they are just about to embrace a new life, Laine said with a calm voice, which was why she was unwilling to communicate with foreign gods. There were few secrets in the outside world about the spirit realm, but they found it hard to understand everything about the spirit realm. We judge their deeds in life, of course, because of different races, statuses, and circumstances. It's hard to judge them as good or evil. Put simply, apart from a few exceptions, those who had achieved extraordinary things among their peers in life, or whose souls had grown stronger, would receive a higher evaluation, and vice versa. Then, based on the standards, the other two caretakers of the all-spirit realm will grant them different endowments, deciding the location of their rebirth in the next life. Finally, they step into the well of reincarnation, just like you see. Laine pointed at the souls, saying, they will separate from their previous lives, born from death into a new life. To ensure a gap between two consecutive lives, naturally, memories cannot remain. Otherwise, hatred will continue generation after generation, and all living beings will be unable to find release. Chapter 160, Chapter 15 The Fall of the Sun. So that's how it is. With a nod, the Divine King felt this journey was truly worthwhile. Samsura determines the birth and death of all beings. The Creator no longer needs to manually bestow souls, as they now derive from samsura itself. Before today, he had not known that such a place existed in the world, let alone the fact that it housed 3 unknown true gods. What is this? Suddenly feeling the temperature around him rise slightly, Zeus snapped back to reality. Prior to stepping into the 4th layer of the spirit realm, he had sensed a scorching breath. It was a force similar to that of the god of sun Helios, yet distinctly different. We've arrived. Stopping in his tracks, Laine looked down at the well of reincarnation, giving a slight indication. Indeed, below. The predecessor to the well of reincarnation was roughly the size of a normal well of later ages, but after being embedded into the 4th layer of the spirit realm, it could no longer be simply described as a well. It's less like a well and more like an imposing wall. When standing nearby, one could barely discern its curving arc. Even if one flew up into the air, the interior of the well's opening appeared more like a lake, even a sea. Souls continuously drifted into it, yet they occupied only the periphery of this well. Clearly, even if the life on the continents increased 1,000-fold, it would still not be enough to congest the cycle of samsura. However, for the Divine King at this moment, the vastness of this divine artifact's body did not attract his attention in the slightest. At the end of his gaze, a golden light was bound by invisible chains, with misty serpents roaming above and below, encircling it on either side. If it were a deity who had once witnessed the establishment of law, they might recognize that this was indeed chaos that had separated from the current worldly order. The golden light itself did not fear the dark mist. Both were actually of the same existence, but the consciousness that led the golden light was different. Yes, Zeus could sense that the golden light possessed its own will. It was dodging and avoiding. But alas, all efforts were futile. Under the chains transformed from the spirit realm's order, it had nowhere to flee, especially since its consciousness now was more akin to instinctive reactions. Is this a deity? Uncertain, the Divine King closely observed the golden orb of light. The power of the sun, the lineage identical to Helios's, the essence of strong divine power, coupled with the question he had just raised, when all these were put together, there was no need to guess the identity of the golden orb anymore. He was the ancient Titan god Hyperion, the son of Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, the god of sun whose whereabouts had been unknown, and of course, he was nothing now. His divine body had been extinguished, leaving only parts of his divinity related to his godhood, manifesting in the form of divine authority of the origin. However, compared to the ancient Titan god himself, this symbol of the sun's divine authority was very stable despite its master having lost subjective consciousness and fallen into a coma-like state. The authority remained constant and undying. The power of a deity is irrevocable, severable by none but themselves or the world. Hence, although the mist serpent continually roamed around the golden light, it could do nothing to it essentially. Ancient god of sun. It seems that after the previous cataclysm, he ultimately fell into your hands. Trying to appear nonchalant, Zeus had a myriad of thoughts. The great sun suppressed by the previous Divine King, with its deity appearing in the spirit realm and suffering such a pitiful fate, held profound implications. Add to that the time when the Divine King conquered the stars, with the master of the spirit realm seemingly intervening. For a moment, Zeus did not know what kind of secrets lay behind all of this. Are you warning me with the fate of this ancient Titan god? A warning. Wasn't it you who just inquired about his whereabouts? Laine didn't look back and retorted. Zeus was somewhat at a loss for words. After all, it was indeed he who had mentioned this matter first. But he had not expected that the Titan god who had disappeared before would appear here in this manner. Watching the collision between the golden light and the mist serpent once again, the changes before his eyes did not satisfy Laine. Around the well of reincarnation, the godhood of the sun was indeed affected, but only slightly. As a result, even the power of chaos could not find the slightest gap to merge with the other. I've said that I would give you a gift, Zeus, and I will not go back on my word. It's just that right now, it needs to be dealt with, especially since you've come a bit too early. Speaking indifferently, Laine meticulously observed the golden light before him. The outermost layer was the remaining divinity and consciousness of the god of sun, within was the foundation of authority, the origin of the sun, and the rules of the current world firmly locked it up, manifesting in the form of godhood. Laine did not intend to break this layer of rules, and it would be difficult for him to do so. Tartarus took an entire era of the outside world to digest the ancient Titan god Mnemosyne, and Hyperion was many times stronger compared to that goddess. Therefore, from the very beginning, he had no intention to take anything away, even if he could summon the Sun Eater to assist. On the contrary, he was thinking about putting something more into it. It seems the power dissipating around is of limited effect. Then let's be more direct. As if no one else was present, he reached out and pointed, and from the clear and profound waters of the well within the divine artifact, a strange essence was extracted. It floated in mid-air, scattered, and finally merged with the mist serpent circling the golden light. So, the next moment, the mist serpent that seemed to have undergone some change lunged forward and fell straight into the golden light. But this time, it was not met with violent resistance. Some change occurred, and in the divine king's eyes, the golden light suddenly dimmed for a moment, and then the most central part split open. A bit of the golden liquid flowed out, which was a small portion of the sun's origin. It still refused any contact other than its master under the protection of the powers of the current world, but this time, it had lost the framework known as godhood. Or rather, it had not completely lost it, but it had transformed. Taking a deep breath, Zeus looked at the sovereign in black before him and said with certainty, "What have you done? Have you destroyed the structure of godhood bestowed by the world upon the deity?" "Yes, as you see," replied Laine, nodding in affirmation. "But this is a defiance of the world's law. No deity can stand against the world because we are its offspring." Zeus was right. From the very first era, the divinely enlightened beings used Your Highness as a form of address for each other. Whose Highness, naturally that of the world. But just as God made man and man did not wish to be at the mercy of God, so Laine might be the first deity to defy the world, but he certainly would not be the last. Thus, with a smile on his face, Laine retorted, "Defying the world. Perhaps it is so. So, is that difficult?"